Good evening, everyone. I'm John Bonifaz, President of Free Speech for People. Thank you for joining us tonight for this live reading of the hundreds of impeachable offenses Donald Trump has committed since assuming power again in January of 2025. Free Speech for People, for those who do not know, is a national nonprofit organization dedicated to defending our democracy and our Constitution across the country. We have been leading a campaign at impeachTrumpAgain.org since January of 2025, where we've been documenting extensively all of Trump's high crimes, hundreds of impeachable offenses. And we're thrilled to be joined tonight by our partners at Women's March for this live reading. We have featured speakers both from Free Speech for People and Women's March. And I just want to have us go around and introduce ourselves before we get started. I'll hand it off to Jax.
Amazing. Thank you so much, John. Hi, everyone. Really nice to meet you all. I'm Jax, they, them pronouns. I'm currently a digital organizing strategist at Free Speech for People.
Partners at Women's March for...
I'll pass it on to Nia.
Nia, do you want to introduce yourself?
Nia, can you hear us?
All right, we'll go to Jocelyn. Jocelyn, can you introduce yourself?
Hey everyone, my name is Jocelyn and I'm the grassroots organizing strategist at Free Speech for People.
Hi everybody, I have a little bit of a lag because we're also live from TikTok. My name is Nia Williams from Free Speech for People, and I'm currently the development and admin associate, and I can pass it on to Jocelyn.
Okay, kind of introduced myself already, so I'll turn it over to Nicole.
Hello, everyone. My name is Nicole Maldonado, she, her, ella, a volunteer coordinator for Women's March, and super excited to be here today. I'll pass it to Alex.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alex. I work in operations for Women's March, and I'm also super excited to be here today, and I'm going to pass to Kendra.
Hi, I'm Kendra from Women's March. I'm the rural organizer there, and thanks for letting me be here.
Wonderful. Thank you all. And thank you all for joining us for this live reading of Trump's impeachable offenses, why he must be impeached and removed from public office. So we're going to get started. We're going to go through the full case for impeaching and removing Donald Trump. You can follow along if you wish at our website, impeachtrumpagain.org, and go to the page of learning more about the case for impeachment. There's a PDF document you can link onto to read the full case, which we will be doing tonight live and going through the entire document. Congress should have opened an impeachment investigation into Trump's violations of the emoluments clauses and into his unlawful, corrupt campaign practices on day one of Trump's second administration. They did not, and the United States and our democracy have paid the price. Those were the first but not the last offenses against our country that Trump has committed since taking office, and for which he should be impeached and removed. Each offense listed here stands as a stark and dangerous assault on our democracy and the rule of law. Taken together, they demonstrate that Trump is intentionally dismantling our democratic institutions in order to consolidate his own power, silence his opponents, shield himself and his cronies from accountability, and usher in an authoritarian regime. This is precisely what our founders feared a corrupt, power-abusing executive might do, and it is why the United States Constitution imposes upon Congress an obligation to impeach and remove corrupt, abusive executives. Unless and until Congress takes its constitutional impeachment obligations seriously, Trump will continue to entrench his corrupt interests, usurp authority committed by the Constitution to the other co-equal government branches, and abuse his power to the detriment of our democracy and the people of our country. Congress can impeach and remove Trump from office for any one of the following acts. It should impeach and remove Trump for all of them. I will underscore that point from our preamble that each one of these high crimes you're going to hear tonight warrant Trump's impeachment and removal. All of them taken together make clear he must be removed. The other thing I'll mention here is that we have categories of these impeachable offenses. These are 26 grounds. It was 27. We combined two of them. That's why we have 26 grounds, each of which has multiple impeachable offenses. We're going to go through each of these grounds. Ground number 1, committing or planning war and humanitarian crimes. In Latin America, the Caribbean, and the Middle East, Trump is abusing his role as commander of the U.S. military to commit atrocities that violate U.S. and international law. These include attacking the sovereign nation of Iran. On February 28th, 2026, Trump, with and through high-ranking members of his administration and in coordination with the Israeli government, abused the might of the U.S. military to carry out an unprovoked, large-scale military attack on the sovereign country of Iran, causing a cascade of violence throughout the Middle East with catastrophic consequences for civilian lives and regional stability. One of the first sites hit was a girls' elementary school in Manab, killing over 100 individuals, including dozens of children, which UNESCO called out as, quote, a grave violation of the protection afforded to schools under international humanitarian law. In the days that followed, American and Israeli bombs have hit at least 13 hospitals and other healthcare facilities and killed more than 1,000 civilians. Trump continued to target civilian infrastructure and has threatened to carry out mass bombings of Iran's civilian infrastructure and to commit genocide against the Iranian people, posting, quote, a whole civilization will die tonight, never to be brought back again. This crisis was only averted because the countries reached a short-term ceasefire, which has since given way to an illegal blockade of Iranian ports. The U.S. targeted and killed Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, Iran's supreme leader, along with other members of the country's senior leadership, without any provocation, prompting retaliatory strikes and prolonged attacks by the United States, Israel, and Iran throughout the Middle East. As of March 25th, 2026, at least 13 U.S. service members have been killed in the fighting. Trump understood that his illegal and unconstitutional operation would result in the deaths of U.S. servicemen, saying, quote, that's the way it is. The United States, alongside Israel, continues to bomb Iran. Obviously, we're in the middle of a current ceasefire, but this was written just a couple weeks ago. The United States, alongside Israel, continues to bomb Iran without authorization from the U.S. Congress, which holds the sole authority to declare war under the War Powers Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Trump's illegal war in the Middle East is estimated to be costing U.S. taxpayers $1 billion per day. This attack follows Trump's previous unlawful and unconstitutional bombing of 3 Iranian nuclear sites on June 21st, 2025, without prior congressional authorization and without any imminent threat to the United States from Iran at that time. Trump's unilateral, unprovoked use of force against Iran intensified conflict in the already volatile Middle East region, impacting not only American civilians in the region, but U.S. military personnel, equipment, and bases. Trump's attacks on Iran constitute crimes of aggression, defined by the United States as, quote, the use of armed force by a state against the sovereignty, territorial integrity, or political independence of another state, or in any other manner inconsistent with the Charter of the United Nations. Aggression cannot be justified, whether political, economic, military, or otherwise, and is considered not just a crime against the victim nation, but against international peace. See UN General Assembly Resolution 3314. Trump's attack on Iran constitutes an assault on Iran's territorial integrity and political independence in a clear violation of the UN Charter, Article 2, Section 4, and the Take Care Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, which obligates Trump to, quote, take care that the laws be faithfully executed, a requirement that includes treaties, the Supremacy Clause, U.S. Constitution, Article 6, Section 2, confirms that all treaties made or which shall be made under the authority of the United States shall be the supreme law of the land. In committing these ultimate crimes of aggression, Trump committed other serious and impeachable offenses. He has usurped Congress's power to declare war. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, the War Powers Clause. He has also abused his power over the military to attack civilian targets, including a school and hospitals, and to kill civilians. Attacking the sovereign nation of Venezuela. On January 3rd, 2026, Trump, with and through high-ranking members of his administration, and by abusing the might of the U.S. military, carried out an unprovoked, unconstitutional, large-scale military attack on the sovereign country of Venezuela. Acting under Trump's orders, the U.S. military bombed multiple locations in northern Venezuela, conducted airstrikes around the capital city of Caracas, killed Venezuelan civilians and soldiers, and kidnapped the country's leader and his wife. Trump has announced plans to place Venezuela under U.S. control and give U.S. oil companies control over Venezuela's oil industry. Just as with the attacks on Iran, Trump's assault on Venezuela's territorial integrity and political independence constitutes a crime of aggression in violation of international law and in violation of this Take Care Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 3, which again obligates Trump to take care that the laws be faithfully executed, a requirement that includes treaties. In committing this ultimate crime of aggression, Trump committed other serious and impeachable offenses. As with Iran, he has usurped Congress's power to declare war here. He has abused his power over the military to attack civilian targets and kill civilians, both in his deadly strikes against civilian boats in the Caribbean and Eastern Pacific and the January 3rd attack on Venezuela itself. And he has engaged in corruption by wresting control of a sovereign nation's natural resources in order to enrich the U.S. oil industry led by companies that had backed Trump financially and politically. Ordering the U.S. military to commit atrocities against civilians in and around the waters of Latin America and the Caribbean. On September 2nd, 2025, the Trump administration attacked a civilian vessel in the Caribbean. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth directed the military to, quote, kill everybody on board the boat. The first missiles destroyed the vessel and killed 9 people. The U.S. military then carried out a second strike, killing 2 victims who had survived the first attack and were left clinging to the burning wreckage. This was only the first such attack. Since then, Trump has ordered multiple military strikes on vessels in and around the waters of Latin America and the Caribbean, killing 159 people and destroying 46 boats as of March 23rd, 2026. The number has risen since. The Trump administration is authorizing strikes against boats without identifying who is in the boat. Trump's rhetoric around these civilians, his extrajudicial determination that they are members of drug cartels, and his designation of these cartels as terrorist organizations does not release either Trump or the United States from obligations under U.S. international law. None of the strikes took place on U.S. soil. They took place in international waters in violation of international and maritime law. Even if the ship left from Venezuela carrying members of the Tren de Aragua cartel intending to carry drugs into the United States, as Trump claims, the attacks would still be unlawful. Nicaragua is not a military force. The U.S. is not at war with Venezuela or the Nicaragua cartel, and the U.S. military was not under attack or acting in self-defense when it sank any of the ships. In carrying out the September attack and subsequent attacks, Trump bypassed reasonable and lawful options, including conducting a lawful search and arrest if warranted. Instead, he abused the power of the U.S. military to intentionally kill civilians whose identities were unknown to Trump or anyone in his administration. Furthermore, it is far from clear that the victims are members of any cartel. The Trump administration has not provided evidence of the victims' guilt of any crimes, and several families have asserted that the victims were fishermen. Furthermore, Trump deployed warships and more than 4,000 Marines and sailors to international waters around Latin America and the Caribbean, increasing the threat and likelihood that he would continue to abuse the U.S. military to commit additional war crimes and crimes against humanity. Increasingly, it appears that Trump is waging a secret, illegal war against civilians of sovereign nations without the authorization of Congress, and that the extrajudicial killings of civilians on these vessels was and is part of his plan to take control of Venezuela and its natural resources. Trump confirmed he has authorized lethal action by CIA operatives in Venezuela and confirmed his interest in strikes on Venezuelan territory, remarking on October 25th, 2025, more than 2 months before his unlawful attack on Venezuela, quote, that we are certainly looking at land now because we got the sea well under control. Planning the forcible displacement of Palestinians from Gaza. Trump also declared his intention to unlawfully and forcibly displace Palestinians from Gaza and for the United States to unlawfully occupy Palestine and financially profit from its development. At the time, Israel was preparing plans to force Gaza residents into an internment camp on the ruins of Rafah, and its Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu continues to promote forced deportation, which he presents as a U.S. project. The forcible deportation of a civilian population from an occupied territory is a war crime under the Fourth Geneva Convention, a treaty to which the United States has been a party for more than 75 years, and qualifies as a felony offense under the U.S. War Crimes Statute. Second ground, unconstitutionally usurping Congress's power to declare war. The War Powers Clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 8, Clause 11, grants Congress the sole power to declare war. In starting illegal and unconstitutional wars with Iran and Venezuela without the authorization by Congress, Trump acted in direct violation of the War Powers Clause of the Constitution. Trump jeopardized and continues to jeopardize American lives and interests with his usurpation of congressional war powers. Attack on Iran. And this goes back to the first ground, but is also part of the second ground. On June 21st, 2025, Trump preemptively attacked the Islamic Republic of Iran without prior congressional authorization and without any imminent threat to the United States from Iran at that time. Congressional leaders were not appropriately briefed or notified of the attack plans until after the attacks were complete, despite foreign leaders being given advance notice of the planned U.S. military action. Trump's unilateral, unprovoked use of force against Iran intensified conflict in the already volatile Middle East region, impacting not only American civilians in the region, but U.S. military personnel, equipment, and bases. Iran had threatened that if the U.S. intervened, it would attack some of the 40,000 U.S. soldiers in the region with ballistic missiles, drones, and other weapons, and ultimately launched missiles at a U.S. military base in Qatar in retaliation. Then on February 28th, 2026, Trump, with and through high-ranking members of his administration and in coordination with the Israeli government, abused the might of the U.S. military to carry out an unprovoked, large-scale military attack on Iran, causing a cascade of violence throughout the Middle East with catastrophic consequences for civilian lives and regional stability. The joint operation has hit a school and 13 hospitals and healthcare facilities, and more than 1,000 civilians have been killed. In retaliatory strikes, 6 U.S. service members based in Kuwait were killed as of March 6, 2026. We know that number is now up to 13. Trump has warned that more will likely be killed in the coming weeks of his illegal and unconstitutional operations, saying, quote, "That's the way it is." The United States, alongside Israel, continues to bomb Iran without authorization from the U.S. Congress, which holds the sole authority to declare war under the War Powers Clause of the U.S. Constitution. Attack on Venezuela. On January 3rd, 2026, Trump, with and through high-ranking members of his administration, and by abusing the might of the U.S. military, carried out an unprovoked, unconstitutional, large-scale military attack on Venezuela. Acting under Trump's orders, the U.S. military bombed multiple locations in northern Venezuela, conducted airstrikes around the capital city of Caracas, killed Venezuelan civilians and soldiers, and kidnapped the country's leader and his wife. Trump has announced plans to place Venezuela under U.S. control and give U.S. companies, oil companies, control over Venezuela's oil industry. Congress neither knew about nor consented to the attack and is still being kept in the dark about significant details about the attack, its costs, and its consequences. I will now hand it to Alex to continue the reading.
The January 3rd attack is an aggressive escalation of the conflict that Trump has been fostering in and around Venezuela. The Trump administration has carried out multiple military strikes on civilian vessels in and around the waters of Latin America and the Caribbean, killing 115 people and destroying 36 boats as of January 2nd, 2026. Trump also deployed warships and more than 4,000 Marines and sailors to international waters around Latin America and the Caribbean. It has become clear that Trump is waging an illegal war against Venezuela in order to take control of its natural resources and for other corrupt purposes, all without congressional authorization. Remarks regarding other countries. Trump's public statements have repeatedly shown a complete disregard for Congress's powers in foreign affairs, as well as his obligations under international law. He has suggested that he could unilaterally annex Greenland, a territory of the sovereign country of Denmark, a key United States ally. Any annexation would have to be approved by the Senate. United States Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Moreover, any attempt to annex Greenland, with or without Senate's approval, would be an unlawful act of aggression, clearly illegal under international law and against the interests of the United States. Likewise, he has bragged that he believes he will have, quote, the honor of taking Cuba. Whether I free it, take it, I think I can do anything I want with it, if you want to know the truth, end quote. This, too, would be illegal under both international and United States law. Ground 3. Committing treason by levying war against the United States, individual states, and their people. Trump is committing treason and commanding United States military forces to commit treason by mobilizing U.S. troops against civilians throughout the United States to instill fear in the civilian population, quell lawful political dissent, politicize our military, and usurp local and state authority. Through his acts, he has, quote, levied war against the United States, qualifying his acts as treason under Article 3, Section 3, Clause 1 of the United States Constitution. These acts of treason and clear abuses of power include the following. In defiance of state and local officials in Illinois and Chicago in October 2025, Trump sent Texas National Guard's troops into Chicago and announced plans to federalize Illinois' own National Guard for use against Illinois civilians. Hundreds of troops are staged in the city, adding to the already significant presence of agents from U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, and other federal agents who have been conducting violent immigration raids throughout the city and detaining protesters, citizens, lawfully present immigrants, and children. Reports indicate that the Pentagon spent weeks planning the military invasion of Chicago. The Supreme Court has since held that Trump lacked authority to deploy these troops in Illinois. However, Trump has indicated he has no plan to comply with this order, saying the troops will come back when crime begins to soar again. Trump attempted to deploy National Guard troops in Portland, Oregon, in defiance of the state of Oregon and the city of Portland. His plans were blocked by a federal district court judge. Less than 1 week before he deployed troops in Chicago and attempted to deploy troops to Portland, Trump and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth spoke to a mandatory gathering of all top U.S. military officials, at which they outlined a plan to engage in warfare against U.S. cities without abiding by constitutional or international humanitarian law constraints. Hegseth informed these military officials that the U.S. military must, quote, unleash overwhelming and punishing violence on the enemy, and denigrated internationally recognized humanitarian rules of warfare. Quote, we also don't fight with stupid rules of engagement. We untie the hands of our warfighters to intimidate, demoralize, hunt, and kill the enemies of our country. No more politically correct and overbearing rules of engagement, just common sense. Maximum lethality and authority for warfighters. Immediately thereafter, Trump made it clear that he is prepared to attack U.S. cities and equated civilians within his target cities, all of which are run by Democrats, to foreign enemies. He announced that he plans to use dangerous cities as training grounds for our military, and he told the gathering that we are under invasion from within, no different than a foreign enemy, but more difficult in many ways because they don't wear uniforms. Trump also threatened to punish any officer who did not endorse his position, telling them at the outset, if you don't like what I'm saying, you can leave the room. Of course, there goes your rank, there goes your future. Through these speeches, Trump and Hegseth amplified and expanded on their illegal war against the several states, that in this war, the military would not be required to adhere to international humanitarian law to protect civilian life, that the military should view the residents of U.S. cities as foreign enemies, and that enemies should be intimidated, demoralized, hunted, and killed. On August 11th, 2025, Trump placed the District of Columbia Police under federal control and deployed more than 2,300 National Guard troops throughout Washington, D.C., purportedly to respond to crime in the city and break up encampments where unhoused people live. 2 weeks later, the majority of these troops began carrying weapons. Trump has also deployed armed, masked ICE and other federal agents to the city and set up checkpoints. ICE has arrested thousands of D.C. residents, half of whom have never been accused of any non-immigration crime. D.C. Attorney General Brian Schwab opposes the occupation of his city, defining it as unprecedented, unnecessary, and unlawful. DC's violent crime rate was already at a 30-year low at the start of the occupation, and regardless of these statistics, the move is unlawful and abuses the authority that the federal government may exercise over the city. Federal troops are prohibited from engaging in civilian law enforcement except in narrow emergency circumstances inapplicable here. This move is undermining local home rule, terrorizing DC residents, and places civilian law enforcement at the mercy of federal troops. DC remains under armed occupation by United States National Guard troops and federal agents. Under a June 7, 2025 memorandum, Trump unlawfully authorized the mobilization of 2,000 National Guard troops to respond to civilian protests against ICE's violent and disruptive raids in Los Angeles. Thousands of troops were deployed to California without the consent of the governor of California, and the plainly unlawful memorandum authorizes the mobilization of additional troops elsewhere in the country without the consent of the governor of any state in which these troops are sent. Although Trump asserts that he has the authority to mobilize these troops pursuant to the U.S. Constitution, he does not. The law enforces the federation of the National Guard only in extreme, limited circumstances that have not occurred here and requires prior consent of the relevant state governor, which Trump did not obtain. Indeed, the troops were mobilized in Los Angeles in direct defiance of the governor of California. As California Governor Newsom correctly said in response to this order, Trump is sending 2,000 National Guard troops into LA County, not to meet an unmet need, but to manufacture a crisis. He is hoping for chaos so he can justify more crackdowns, more fear, and more control. The mobilization of troops against civilian protesters violates protesters' freedom of assembly and speech, usurps state and local authority to enforce local laws, and undermines our democracy. On September 2nd, 2025, a federal judge ruled after a 3-day trial that this deployment was unlawful for violating the Posse Comitatus Act, a federal law in which bars the military from enforcing domestic laws without explicit permission from Congress. Trump has threatened to mobilize military forces in other Democratic-led cities whose local and state governments have been critical of Trump or ICE. In other words, he has threatened to abuse the U.S.'s military power to occupy with armed troops any community that opposes him. He declared on August 26, 2025, that he has, quote, the right to do anything he wants to do when it comes to deploying the National Guard troops in U.S. cities, in defiance of the Constitution and U.S. law. He has named Memphis and Baltimore as future targets. He has readied 23,500 National Guard service members to be trained for civil unrest missions in the United States. Ground 4. Committing treason and abusing his power by inciting violence, including murder, in Minnesota and covering up the execution of Minnesota civilians by ICE agents. Trump has targeted Minneapolis and Minnesota as part of his campaign to punish, defund, and inflict state-sponsored violence on cities and states that elect Democrats. Trump has militarized and weaponized federal law enforcement, particularly U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, to punish the opposition party, disrupt local communities, instill fear in the civilian population, and quell lawful political dissent. He is targeting Minnesota in no small part because Governor Tim Walz served as Vice President Kamala Harris's running partner in the 2024 presidential election. Because of his animus against Representative Ilhan Omar, a Somali American who represents a Minneapolis district, because of the citizens of Minneapolis voted against Trump in all 3 presidential elections, and because Minneapolis is home to a large immigrant community. In December 2025, Trump launched a massive militarized operation against Minneapolis residents, which he escalated in early January 2026 by deploying hundreds and announcing the deployment of thousands of federal agents into the city. Agents from ICE, Customs and Border Protection, and Homeland Security investigations have attacked people going about their daily lives and inflicted violence on immigrants and citizens, including advocates, witnesses, and protesters. Many of these agents are masked and armed. And in the lead up to this attack on Minneapolis, Trump incited hatred and violence against the city's Somali residents through xenophobic and dehumanizing insults, calling them garbage. Federal agents have now begun executing people in the streets. Trump and his administration are encouraging, condoning, and covering up these murders, protecting the shooters, and spreading dangerous disinformation about the shootings and the victims, Renee Nicole Good and Alex Preddy. On January 7th, 2026, an ICE agent shot and killed 37-year-old Renee Nicole Good, an unarmed civilian, United States citizen, Minneapolis resident, wife, mother of young children, and poet. Video evidence demonstrates and witnesses confirm that she posed no threat to the ICE agents when ICE agent Jonathan Ross opened fire, shooting her 3 times, striking her in the head, and killing her. ICE agents failed to render any aid to Good in violation of Department of Homeland Security policies and blocked, then delayed emergency medical personnel from reaching her. This was an unjustified homicide, otherwise known as murder. Trump, directly and through senior officials in his administration, including the Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, immediately began to cover up the crime and protect ICE agents from being held responsible for Renee Good's murder. They repeatedly lied about Good, the ICE agents' actions, and the events surrounding the shooting, all of which is refuted by witnesses and video evidence of the event. The Trump administration, by and through the FBI Director Kash Patel, blocked Minnesota law enforcement from gaining access to materials and evidence related to the shooting. And the Civil Rights Division of the Department of Justice, led by Harmeet Dillon, one of Trump's former personal attorneys, has refused to investigate the killing. Instead, the FBI and DOJ are forcing employees to investigate Good's widow, which has prompted a wave of resignation. These moves come after a year-long effort by Trump and Patel to fire nonpartisan career civil servants in the DOJ and the FBI and turn them into a partisan body that serves Trump's interests and undermines the rights of American citizens and residents. The Trump administration also ramped up its occupation of the city, deploying more than 100 new Border Patrol agents to the city in the aftermath of Good's murder. On January 24th, 2026, federal immigration agents murdered Alex Preddy, a 37-year-old ICU nurse, when he was part of a small group of approximately 15 peaceful protesters. Video and witness accounts demonstrate that immediately before the shooting, a federal agent shoved a female observer standing next to Mr. Preddy. When Preddy moved between the agent and the woman he had assaulted, the agent sprayed Mr. Preddy with a chemical agent and pulled him to his knees. At least 6 other agents then surrounded Mr. Preddy, pushed him to the ground, retrieved Mr. Preddy's gun, and walked away. The remaining agents then shot Mr. Preddy 10 times, killing him. The impeachable offenses continue, but before I pass, I want to remind everyone that Congress works for you. It is extremely important that you exercise your right by calling them, emailing them, texting them, making them listen to these demands, and making them take action in impeaching Trump. I will now pass on to Jocelyn.
Thank you so much. Jocelyn, before we jump in, do you mind if we share a couple comments from the chat? And then just if you all want to jump in within your thoughts here.
Go ahead.
All right, so we can all agree with that one right there.
And just a reminder for those that are just tuning in, this is a live reading of the case for impeachment, which can be found at impeachtrumpagain.org/impeachment. I know that you're still sharing a couple of comments. I'm going to continue the impeachable offense that Alex was reading now. As with the murder of Renee Good, the federal agents did not provide medical aid and delayed third parties who could have provided assistance. Although Mr. Preddy was armed with a gun he was legally licensed to carry, he never brandished it at any point during the encounter, despite being assaulted physically and with chemical agents. And the federal agent had control of Mr. Preddy's weapon when they murdered him. And as with Renee Good's murder, Trump directly and through senior officials in his administration, including Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem, immediately began to cover up the crime, protect the ICE agents who killed Mr. Preddy, and spread dangerous and demonstrably false disinformation about Mr. Preddy, the protest, and his murder. The killings of Good and Preddy were a foreseeable and intended result of Trump's violent militarization of federal law enforcement, the deployment of thousands of these armed mass agents into Minneapolis and its surrounding neighborhoods, the Trump administration's approval of the violent, unlawful shooting and assault of civilians by ICE agents throughout the country, and the dehumanizing rhetoric that Trump directly and through his senior officials have targeted at Minneapolis residents. The large-scale assault on Minneapolis amounts to the illegal occupation of a U.S. city by federal law enforcement acting under the unconstitutional and treasonous orders of Trump, directly and by and through senior members of his administration. Ground 5, calling for the execution of members of Congress. On November 20th, 2025, Trump called for the execution of Democratic lawmakers, all of whom are currently serving in the U.S. Senate or U.S. House of Representatives, and who previously served in the military or in intelligence on behalf of the United States, because they released a short video that accurately stated to current members of the military and intelligence communities, quote, "Like us, you all swore an oath to protect and defend this Constitution. Right now, the threats to our Constitution aren't just coming from abroad, but from right here at home. Our laws are clear. You can refuse illegal orders. You must refuse illegal orders. No one has to carry out orders that violate the law or our Constitution," end quote. Trump then called for their execution over these words. In one post, he wrote, quote, "It's called seditious behavior at the highest level. Each of these traitors to our country should be arrested and put on trial. Their words cannot be allowed to stand. We won't have a country anymore. An example must be set. President DJT," end quote. In another, he wrote, "Seditious behavior punishable by death." And then he reposted a third party's post, "Hang them, George Washington would." It is a flagrant and dangerous abuse of power for Trump to call for the execution of members of Congress. Impeachable in any context, Trump's call for the execution of his political rivals is particularly dangerous in the current political climate, which Trump has fostered, in which lawmakers and judges have faced political violence and threats for opposing Trump's policies. Trump is wholly aware that his threats place these politicians' lives at risk, incite violence by his followers, and undermine our democracy, which cannot survive where dissent is punishable by death. Ground number 6, abusing the power of his office to unlawfully maintain political power. Trump is attempting to subvert our elections, steal the 2026 midterms and subsequent federal elections, and retain his party's control of Congress through illicit and unlawful means. Specifically, he is carrying out or participating in the following schemes: unlawfully interfering with redistricting to unlawfully maintain his party's control of Congress. Trump coordinated with the governor of Texas and with Republicans in the Texas state legislature to carry out an unlawful gerrymandering of the state's congressional districts in order to silence voters of color and secure additional Republican seats during the 2026 midterms. The Trump administration has actively pressured Texas Republicans to redraw its congressional districting maps, and the Department of Justice baselessly alleged that the previous map is illegal. Then, when legislators fled the state in order to protect their constituents from the 11th hour unlawful redistricting scheme, Trump publicly indicated a willingness to use and abuse the resources of the FBI to track down Texas legislators. Soon thereafter, FBI Director Kash Patel did just that in an unprecedented weaponization of federal law enforcement to quell dissent in a state political dispute. The involvement of Trump and his senior officials in partisan redistricting efforts also violates the Hatch Act, which limits political activities of federal employees. On August 7, 2025, Trump announced on Truth Social that he was directing the Department of Commerce to conduct a mid-decade census that excludes undocumented US residents in a clear bid to unconstitutionally manipulate our country's congressional districts. This continues Trump's previous attempt in his first administration to inject a citizenship question into the census, which was thwarted by a Supreme Court ruling. Such a census would upend more than 225 years of census-taking practices and violate the US Constitution. The 14th Amendment of the United States Constitution requires that representatives shall be apportioned among the several states according to their respective numbers, counting the whole number of persons in each state. Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution requires Congress to conduct a census every 10 years in order to determine representation in Congress. And while federal law authorizes the Department of Commerce to conduct mid-decade censuses, it is prohibited from using a mid-decade census for apportionment of representatives in Congress among the several states or for prescribing congressional districts. This proposed mid-decade census would insert citizenship questions or requirements that would both undermine accurate and complete data collection and frighten or burden even US citizens or documented residents. A particularly salient fear given that the Trump administration and the US Immigration and Customs Enforcement, or ICE, are using data from previously protected databases to raid homes, schools, workplaces, and courtrooms in immigrant communities. An inaccurate count will dilute the voice of minority voters and take from these communities vital federal funding for infrastructure, education, housing, and other essential services. Trump's plans to bend the census to his whims violate the US Constitution, statutory authority, and long-standing tradition and convention. Directing his officers to violate the Hatch Act and other ethics laws by using taxpayer money to fund blatantly partisan messaging. The Department of Homeland Security ran a public service announcement at airports featuring Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem blaming Democrats for the lapse in congressional appropriations. The Department of Agriculture created a notice on its website blaming Democrats for Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, SNAP, funding running out after Trump refused to continue funding SNAP using emergency contingency funds that Congress had appropriated for the program's continued operation. Several departments altered federal employees out of office email messages without their knowledge to blame Democrats for the lapse in congressional appropriations. The Department of Housing and Urban Development, the Small Business Administration, and the Department of Justice placed banners on government websites blaming Democrats for the shutdown. Trump sued the IRS, over which he has unlawfully taken complete control, for $10 billion in damages, more than his entire net worth, because a federal contractor leaked his tax returns during his first term. The federal district court in which the case was filed expressed serious doubts about the merits of the case and whether the court has jurisdiction because of the clear conflict of interest. On May 18, 2026, Trump and the Department of Justice, over which Trump has also unlawfully taken complete control, announced that even though Trump withdrew the case in the face of the district's court's doubts as to whether the case would go forward, to settle the case, the Department of Justice would place $1.8 billion into a slush fund to be dispersed to Trump's political allies, including January 6 insurrectionists. This slush fund will use taxpayer money to reward his political allies who commit crimes and incentivize his current political cronies to disregard the law, knowing that they are not only unlikely to be punished, but may in fact be financially rewarded for their crimes. The agreement also included an addendum that prohibits the IRS from inspecting or investigating any tax returns already filed by Trump, his family, his companies, or related companies. therefore protecting them from oversight, investigation, and prosecution for tax-related crimes. This agreement is not a settlement of any colorable claims, but an illegal and unconstitutional theft by Trump of taxpayer dollars and purported tax immunity. Engaging in voter intimidation and suppression. Attempted to unlawfully ban mail-in voting and usurp the power to regulate elections from the states and Congress. Attempted to unlawfully require proof of citizenship at the polls and punish states that continue counting ballots beyond Election Day. This attempt has been blocked by the courts as of October 31st, 2025. Illegally creating an unreliable national voter registration system to facilitate purges and cast doubt on future elections. Ordered or authorized an FBI raid in Fulton County, Georgia, relying on debunked claims about ballots in the 2020 elections. The seizure of ballots points to similar attempts to overturn election results in upcoming elections. Attempting to illegally assert control over the 2026 elections. Repeatedly made comments that elections should be canceled or nationalized to ensure that Republicans maintain power. Through Attorney General Pam Bondi, attempting to extort control over states' voter rolls in exchange for decreased ICE activity. Attempting to pressure states to sign away control over their voter rolls by giving the federal government the power to unilaterally remove voters it deems ineligible without any process for either the states or the removed voters. Ordering DHS to create a state citizenship list and attempting to block the mail-in votes that do not appear on the list. The DOJ has since admitted in court that the list would create, it would create would not be reliable, and no responsible state should use it to update its voting rolls. Ground 7, illegally kidnapping, imprisoning, and removing US residents. Trump, through officials within his administration and federal agents, has kidnapped, detained, and removed hundreds of thousands of people without due process. His victims include US citizens, lawful visa holders, children, and hundreds of thousands of people who live peacefully in our country and have no criminal record. Acting pursuant to Trump's orders and under his authority, federal agents have taken people from their homes, cars, workplaces, and communities, moved them from state to state to evade court oversight, and held them without access to attorneys and family in abusive and inhumane conditions of confinement, in some cases, in defiance of court orders. And thousands have been smuggled out of the country, again, often in evasion or defiance of court orders, including to countries that pose danger to the victim's safety and to countries with which they have no connection. Most of the hundreds of thousands of people who have been unlawfully kidnapped, imprisoned, or removed from the country have been caught up in racist and politically motivated unconstitutional immigration sweeps that Trump has ordered across the country. Trump has also targeted students, activists, protesters, and bystanders to punish them for exercising their First Amendment rights to dissent against the Trump administration or its international allies, and immigrants who have contested illegal deportation orders. I'm going to stop there. Once again, we urge everyone that's tuning in to visit the impeachtrumpagain.org. You can see how your member of Congress voted on the recent House floor votes that Congress voted back in June and December of 2025. You can look at the tracker on impeachtrumpagain.org/tracker. Congressman Larson of Connecticut also introduced 13 articles of impeachment in April, and we are urging, especially his constituents, to call him, call his office, email him, contact him, and urge him to force a floor vote on all or any of his 13 articles of impeachment. And with that, I will pass it over to Nicole to continue reading the grounds for impeachment. Thank you.
Thank you. Trump must be impeached for these brazen abuses of power that subject hundreds of thousands of people to violence, kidnapping, assault, and inhumane conditions of confinement because of their perceived immigration status, race, ethnicity, or opposition to Trump's policies. In addition to these egregious crimes, Trump has gone even further in his abuses of certain individuals. He has implemented an unlawful, unconstitutional, and costly scheme to smuggle people out of the United States and keep them in foreign prisons and concentration camps without due process, access to the courts, or access to any of the rights to which they are entitled. Once smuggled out of the country, senior Trump officials are disavowing responsibility for the prisoners, even as the US government pays foreign governments to keep the migrants confined. Trump and senior officials acting at his direction are using the foreign imprisonment that they orchestrated and funded as an excuse to defy court orders to return these individuals to the United States soil. And Trump is preparing to expand this scheme to imprison US citizens in foreign concentration camps. Trump's impeachable offenses as they pertain to illegal kidnapping, imprisonment, and removal of civilians include, but are not limited to, targeted deportations of individuals for exercising their constitutional rights. Rumeisa Stork, a Fulbright scholar with a master's degree from Columbia University, and at the time a PhD candidate at Tufts University, Dr. Stork was illegally and basically stripped of her student visa, kidnapped by masked ICE agents, taken across multiple state lines in order to evade court oversight, and ultimately taken to a private prison in Louisiana, where she was held in detention more than 1,000 miles from her community and her attorneys. Her sole offense was co-authoring an op-ed in a student newspaper, asking the university to abide by undergraduate student Senate resolutions that sought to hold Israel accountable for international law violations against Palestine. She was released on bail on May 9, 2025, by the federal district court judge in Vermont, overseeing her challenge to her removal. Pursuant to a court order, she was able to resume her studies, earn her PhD, and has returned to Turkey. Mahmoud Khalil, a recent recipient of a master's degree from Columbia University, a lawful permanent resident of the United States, and a soon-to-be father, Mr. Khalil was imprisoned for 104 days from March 8, 2025 until he was released on bail in June 2025. ICE officials arrested him in his apartment building in New York without a warrant and removed him to Louisiana, where he was held in a private prison over 1,000 miles from his attorneys, family, and community. The U.S. State Department is seeking to revoke his permanent residency and deport him. He has not been charged with any criminal offense. He was arrested because he helped lead pro-Palestine protests at Columbia University when he was a student there. Mr. Khalil is Palestinian with Algerian citizenship. In September, an immigration judge ruled in favor of the government, though on different grounds that the Trump administration initially justified their arrest. The Board of Immigration Appeals affirmed that ruling, but it was later revealed the Trump administration interfered in that process, expediting it and causing multiple judges to recuse themselves. Trump has orchestrated the kidnapping, illegal detention, and other attacks on the immigration status of other students and academics for their protected speech, including Lika Cordia, who was detained for over a year, Monsek Magdawi, Badar Kansuri, and Yuseo Shon, whom the Trump administration has been temporarily enjoined from illegally arresting. Several individuals illegally targeted by the Trump administration left the country rather than undergo kidnapping and extended unlawful detention. Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia, a father of 3, who has lived in the United States since fleeing gang violence in El Salvador as a child. Mr. Abrego Garcia holds a withholding of removal status to prevent his removal because of the high likelihood that he will face persecution upon his return. On March 12, 2025, he was stopped by ICE agents, arrested in front of his 5-year-old son, and with no warrant and no lawful basis taken into custody, moved across state lines and flown to El Salvador, where he was immediately imprisoned in a maximum security prison known for its rampant human rights abuses and disappearances of prisoners. His imprisonment was funded by the Trump administration, which is paying millions of tax-paying dollars to El Salvador to imprison immigrants removed from the United States. Like others held in El Salvador following the removal from the United States by the Trump administration, Mr. Abrego Garcia had not been charged with any crime in either country. Despite multiple court orders, including a court order of the United States Supreme Court, the Trump administration defiantly refused to facilitate his return for more than 2 months. When he was finally returned to the United States, he was immediately imprisoned in Tennessee to face hastily orchestrated charges that his attorneys categorized as the government's latest act of contempt. After a federal court ordered his release, Mr. Abrego Garcia was arrested while attending an immigration check-in. And the Trump administration is now trying to deport him to Liberia, a country with which he has no connection, and lied to the court about Costa Rica's willingness to accept him. Subsequent court documents have confirmed that Mr. Abrego Garcia's arrest is retaliation for his successful fight against his initial illegal deportation order. In December, Mr. Abrego Garcia was ordered by a federal court to be released. Again, and a temporary injunction was issued to prevent him from being rearrested. Mario Guevara, an Emmy-winning Spanish-language reporter with a valid work permit who covered immigration issues in Georgia, was unlawfully arrested for exercising his First Amendment rights to record law enforcement during a protest, detained for over 100 days despite all criminal charges against him being dropped, then deported to El Salvador. Systematically undermining basic constitutional guarantees for immigrants during the removal process. Trump, directly and through senior officials within his administration, has engaged in a coordinated plan to strip due process rights from immigrants. This includes the unlawful and unconstitutional attempt to end birthright citizenship, the occupation of cities by military and quasi-military forces, and systematically defying court orders. He has undertaken actions that individually, collectively, attempt to evade congressional and judicial safeguards for residents in the United States. Trump, directly and through senior officials within his administration, has eroded the independence of the immigration court system in order to effect his unconstitutional and criminal assault on immigrants, immigrant rights, and the rule of law. Immigration courts are part of the executive branch, not the judicial branch, but are expected to act independently and in service of the law, not of Trump. But Trump has fired or caused the resignation of hundreds of immigration judges, institute pro-fascist imagery in hiring drives, describe the position as deportation judges, and the result has been an understaffed, inexperienced, partisan workforce that will follow Trump's directives instead of the law. Similarly, he has stacked the Board of Immigration Appeals, which hears appeals from the decision of immigration judges, with partisan supporters who virtually always rule in his favor. Breaking with decades of precedent. Trump's DOJ willfully has misinterpreted a long-standing federal law and ignored immigrants' basic due process rights in order to imprison and deny bond hearings to any immigrant the administration deems to be undocumented, as part of its inhumane and illegal mass detention policy. The law requires mandatory detention only of newly arrived immigrants seeking admission to a country. No other administration has attempted to interpret it more broadly. Multiple federal appellate courts have rejected Trump's expansive and unconstitutional imprisonment practices. As discussed above, the Trump administration regularly attempted to avoid court oversight by shuffling high-profile immigrant detainees around the country. Because Congress has refused to end this practice, it has since become a national policy, with the Trump administration regularly moving detainees across state lines to impede their ability to contest their imprisonment, to access family and legal advocacy, or to make public the violent and inhumane conditions to which they are subject. As explained elsewhere, ICE is a fundamentally broken agency that must be abolished, not reformed. However, the Trump administration has abandoned the meager existing internal constraints on federal agencies' actions, ignoring procedures in order to more quickly and ruthlessly violate residents' rights. For instance, in August 2025, the Trump administration unlawfully attempted to expel and remove from the country hundreds of Guatemalan unaccompanied minors who crossed into the United States alone and who are under the care of the Department of Health and Human Services, Office of Refugee Resettlement. With almost no warning, on August 31st, 2025, the Trump administration and ICE bypassed procedures, pick up children from shelters, and load them onto planes, in clear violation of the law. A judge had not convened a weekend hearing to block the removal. Indeed, a government attorney admitted that one plane may have turned around after takeoff only because of the emergency hearing. Some of the children had active immigration cases pending, and all were denied sufficient notice, due process, and the special protections afforded to children under United States immigration law. Absent the temporary court order, the children will have been returned to Guatemala to face the abuse and violence from which they fled. On November 20, ICE detained Annie Lucia Lopez Bellosa, an 18-year-old college student in Boston Logan Airport, and in violation of a federal court order and contrary to ICE's own guidelines, deported her to El Salvador without the opportunity to call a lawyer or her family. Although the Trump administration claimed they will comply with a court order to facilitate her return, and ICE agents sent her a message claiming she will be let go, the government later filing a motion in court demonstrating that the flight was a trap. They plan to immediately detain and deport her. Lopez did not appear for the flight and remains in El Salvador. Illegally using foreign prisons to terrorize communities and evade oversight. Trump, senior officials within his administration, and agents of ICE and other federal agencies have paid El Salvador $6 million to accept and imprison more than 230, mostly Venezuelan men, who sought refuge in the United States in a notorious and overcrowded maximum security prison known as El Centro de Confinamiento del Terrorismo, CECOT, where prisoners are denied basic human rights, including education, recreation, and visitors, and subjected to forced labor. Senior Trump officials were involved in smuggling Venezuelan migrants out of the United States via planes that took off in secret and in order to evade court oversight. Although Trump and senior Trump officials claim that these individuals are members of a Venezuelan gang, they did not present any evidence to support these claims, nor does membership in a gang warrant removal to a foreign country or being subject to human rights violations. In July, these migrants were sent to Venezuela as part of a prisoner exchange between El Salvador and Venezuela. Forcibly and unlawfully removed Kilmar Armando Abrego Garcia to CECOT, where he was subject to human rights abuses and denied access to attorneys and visitors. Senior Trump officials refused to facilitate his return for months, in defiance of multiple court orders, forcing him to remain in unlawful detention under abusive, inhumane conditions for more than 2 months. Arrested, shackled, and forcibly removed more than 100 migrants to Panama. Because their countries of origin will not accept them, Panamanian police stripped the migrants of their passports, took away their funds, barred them from seeing lawyers, and locked them in a hotel as prisoners. Panamanian officials removed migrants who refused to go back to their home countries to a camp in a remote jungle of Panama and denied access to attorneys and visitors. They have since been released, but many now remain in a limbo, unable to safely return to their home country, but unable to stay in Panama or return to the United States. And with this, I'll pass it to Nia. My ask for you guys today is please go to our website, womensmarch.com, and join our petition to impeach President Donald J. Trump.
Thank you, Nicole. I can continue reading the offenses. Arrested and deported hundreds of migrants to Costa Rica, where they were held without access to attorneys, their families, or any of the rights to which they are entitled as migrants seeking refuge in the United States. Announced plans to expand this scheme to include the removal of U.S. citizens to foreign prisons, specifically by telling Salvadorian President Bukele that the homegrowns are next, the homegrowns. We got to build about 5 more places. I'm sure we all remember when that happened. Imprisoned 8 immigrants in inhumane conditions on a U.S. military base in Djibouti after attempting to unlawfully remove them to South Sudan in direct violation of a court order. The Trump administration intended to leave them in South Sudan, which holds a U.S. State Department travel advisory due to the threat of crime, kidnapping, and armed conflict. But when blocked by the court, opted instead to reroute the flight to Djibouti, where the immigrants were being imprisoned in inhumane conditions, a single room in a converted shipping container on a U.S. military base, under ICE guard and facing illness and threats of terrorist attack. The 8 immigrants have since been permanently relocated to South Sudan, a country most of the immigrants are not native to, which is in the midst of a civil war. Enabled the imprisonment of 5 immigrants in a maximum security prison in Eswatini, where they have been denied access to their attorneys and subject to inhumane conditions. None of the immigrants are from or have any connection to Eswatini. Though all these men were convicted of a crime in the United States, all served their time and were released between 2 to 13 years ago. None have been accused of any new crimes in either the United States or Eswatini. Deported at least 29 people to Equatorial Guinea, where they have been incarcerated until they agreed to repatriation to their home country, which the United States was barred from directly deporting them to. These schemes violate the U.S. Constitution and international human rights laws. The clear violations and the risk that these violations could be expanded to target not just American citizens, but also specifically those who engage in constitutionally protected speech to dissent against Trump were laid out in a unanimous 3-judge ruling of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Fourth Circuit in Mr. Abrego Garcia's case, written by the Honorable Judge Harvey Wilkinson, and this is a quote. The government is asserting a right to stash away residents of this country in foreign prisons without the semblance of due process that is the foundation of our constitutional order. Further, it claims in essence that because it has rid itself of the custody, that there is nothing that can be done. This should be shocking, not only to judges, but to the intuitive sense of liberty that Americans far removed from courthouses would still hold dear. Judge Wilkinson further warned, if today the executive claims the right to deport without due process and in disregard of court orders, what assurances will there be tomorrow that it will not deport American citizens and then disclaim responsibility to bring them home? And what assurance shall there be that the executive will not train its broad discretionary powers upon its political enemies? The threat, even if not the actuality, would always be present, and the executive's obligation to take care of the laws, that the laws be faithfully executed, would lose its meaning, end quote. These examples represent a tiny fraction of the hundreds, if not thousands of people whom Trump and his subordinates have illegally removed from the country and placed in concentration camps and other forms of cruel and unusual punishment on foreign soil, and whose ongoing detention is being paid for by U.S. taxpayers. Given Trump's plan to expand this scheme to include U.S. citizens, they will represent an even smaller fraction of all those who risk being disappeared to foreign countries, tortured in foreign prisons, and placed out of reach of U.S. rights, courts, and due process. Trump's removal of anyone, whether migrant, resident, or citizen, to a foreign concentration camp for imprisonment in order to subject these individuals to cruel and unusual punishment, due process violations, civil rights abuses, and human rights violations without consequence or oversight is an unequivocal assault on the rule of law and on the foundation of our democracy. Number 8, unconstitutionally and systemically violating the First Amendment. Trump has systemically abused his power to stop people from and punish people for exercising the freedom of speech, assembly, and press. These are amongst the most sacred and important rights enshrined in the First Amendment to the US Constitution and are necessary components of a functional democracy. Our democracy cannot survive if oppositional political speech is suppressed, if people are denied access to a robust and independent press, or if people are afraid to take positions counter to those expressed by a ruling party, all of which is now occurring as a result of Trump's lawless conduct. Violating and chilling freedom of speech. Threatened to prosecute individuals who burn an American flag by charging such individuals with ancillary crimes such as incitement, violent crimes, hate crimes, civil rights violations, and other property crimes. His threat violates the First Amendment and well-established Supreme Court precedent, including Texas versus Johnson, which holds flag burning as a form of political expression protected by the First Amendment, and demonstrates Trump's willingness to weaponize law enforcement in order to falsely and selectively prosecute and silence his opponents. Trump has since gone further and has publicly claimed that he has criminalized flag burning itself and ordered federal agents and the US military to arrest anyone burning a flag and indicated that they will be imprisoned for 1 year, overtly demanding the imprisonment of people for exercising First Amendment rights afforded to them by the Constitution. No such law exists. Suspended 144 employees from the Environmental Protection Agency in July 2025 and approximately 30 employees at the Federal Emergency Management Agency in August 2025 in retaliation for writing letters to Congress raising concerns about the Trump administration's handling of those agencies. Unlawfully arrested, detained, and canceled the visas or permanent residency statuses of individuals who protested Israel's war against Palestine or US foreign policies with regard to Israel and Palestine. Arrested and threatened to arrest elected officials who oppose Trump's policies, including California Governor Gavin Newsom, California Senator Alex Padilla, New York Mayor Ross Baraka, Representative LaMonica McIver, and New York City Comptroller Brad Lander. Stripped universities of millions of dollars in government grants because these universities refused to repress their own students' freedom of speech and assembly and allegedly utilized admissions practices disfavored by the Trump administration. One federal judge, rejecting Trump's punitive freeze on Harvard's research grants, found that the attack amounted to retaliation, unconstitutional conditions, and unconstitutional coercion, and that's a quote. Nevertheless, several universities have capitulated to Trump's demands. Stripped federal funds from any organization that did not adopt the government's positions on gender and sexual orientation, which has undermined the ability of nonpartisan, nonprofit organizations that protect children from abuse to extend protections to LGBTQ children. And I did want to hop in and say Happy Pride Month to everybody celebrating, which should be all of us. I'm sad that this is happening. I will continue. Censored and limited public access to the arts, educational services, and information about US and world history by purging government websites of important information and US history, ordering the Smithsonian to change its exhibits, took over the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts, ended federal support to public libraries and archives throughout the country, and censored books and other educational materials at public schools on military bases. Subjected or threatened to subject law firms to punishing sanctions via executive order and invasive investigations and retaliation for these firms or firm employees for engaging in core First Amendment protected speech and association, specifically their hiring practices and representation of clients or issues disfavored by Trump, and use these executive orders, investigations, or the threat thereof to extort nearly $1 billion in free legal fees for his chosen legal causes from these firms and coerce them into changing their hiring and pro bono representation practices. Even many large law firms that did not explicitly capitulate have refused to represent challengers of Trump's policies. With the chairman of the Federal Communications Committee, the commissions at the FCC, Brendan Carr abused his power to orchestrate the censorship of Jimmy Kimmel and the suspension of Kimmel's late-night television program by threatening federal action against ABC affiliates that aired his program and using as leverage Nexstar, a company that holds multiple ABC affiliates, pending FCC approval to complete a $6.2 billion acquisition. Trump and Carr demanded censorship of Kimmel because he criticized Trump and his supporters' response to the Charlie Kirk killing. Trump and Carr publicly celebrated Kimmel's suspension and ABC and Disney's capitulation to their abuse of power, and Trump immediately called for NBC to cancel 2 additional late-night hosts who have been critical of Trump in a demonstration of his plans to continue abusing the power of his office to silence his critics. The FCC subsequently launched another investigation of ABC after Kimmel made a joke about Trump's age. So Trump is very sensitive. Designated Antifa a terrorist organization, despite the fact that experts have defined Antifa as being an anti-fascist, anti-white supremacy ideology, movement, or subculture, and not an organization. It has no leader, centralized structure, membership, headquarters, and it has never been connected to a terrorist attack in the United States. Trump's order requires and authorizes federal law enforcement and other agencies to target anyone they brand as being Antifa, being associated with Antifa, or who provide funds to people or organizations who ascribe to the Antifa ideology. Trump is abusing the terrorist organization designation in order to carry out unconstitutional investigations and prosecutions of people based on their personal ideologies, speech, and association, and to target his political and ideological opponents. Attorney General Bondi has since ordered federal law enforcement to prioritize investigations into Antifa and other supposedly left-wing groups, and the IRS is apparently cooperating with the FBI to investigate nonprofits who support Antifa. Similarly, Sebastian Gorka, Trump's counterterrorism czar, announced that the administration will prioritize countering transgender ideology and secular political groups as part of its counterterrorism efforts. Through the FCC, instigated a frivolous and politically motivated investigation of Media Matters for its First Amendment protected criticisms of Elon Musk's content moderation policies on X. That investigation was preliminarily enjoined on August 15, 2025, with the judge holding that it presents a straightforward First Amendment violation. And that also was a quote. Through Attorney General Pam Bondi, threatened to investigate and prosecute responses to the Charlie Kirk killing the administration disagrees with, even extending to businesses that refuse to commemorate him or individuals who continue to criticize his political beliefs but disavowed violence. Trump agreed with remarks threatening to go after a reporter directly for being unfair. Through the Department of Education, published a rule change to the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program, barring forgiveness if a borrower worked for a government or nonprofit that engaged in activities with a substantial illegal purpose as defined by the Secretary of the Department of Education. Given the scope of protected activity that Trump has described as illegal, this rule will certainly chill speech and will almost certainly be used to punish disfavored speech and his political opponents, like immigration rights advocates. And before we continue on with the charges, I did just want to remind everybody to please, please, please spread the word on social media and make sure to continue calling your senators, calling your Congress members, and tagging them on social media as well. And with that, I will pass it to Kendra.
Thank you. Through Kash Patel, sought to release a decade-old investigative file on Eric Swalwell, a Trump critic, congressman, and California gubernatorial candidate, which found that Swalwell had not committed any wrongdoing, violating and chilling freedom of assembly, mobilized National Guard troops and the U.S. Marines against nonviolent civilian protesters in California without authorization and by and over the expressed objections of the governor of California, and authorized the mobilization of the National Guard troops elsewhere in the country in order to chill and quell civilians who would exercise their freedom of speech and assembly to protest against federal immigration authorities' violent and disruptive practices. Through bulletins issued by the Department of Homeland Security, instructed local law enforcement that protesters' nonviolent behaviors and dress, including riding bicycles, wearing masks, carrying cameras, or live streaming protests, should be viewed as threatening or precursors to violence, that protesters should be viewed as an adversary. Unlawfully arrested Bajan Mavawala II, a U.S. Army veteran who served in Afghanistan for protesting against the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement in Spokane, Washington. Mavawala was arrested more than 1 month after participating in a protest and charged with conspiracy to impede or injure officers. He was indicted just 2 days after Richard Barker, acting U.S. Attorney for the Eastern District of Washington and a career public servant, resigned from his position. Professor Robert Change at the University of California, Irvine, decried the indictment as selective prosecutive that would have a chilling effect on free speech. Mr. Marvelwala faces up to 6 years in prison. Through federal agents on Trump's orders, detained, assaulted, and/or harassed individuals without bias and without pressing criminal charges for engaging in First Amendment protected activity while opposing Trump's policies. Through federal agents and prosecutors acting on Trump's orders, abused administrative warrants and secret grand juries to chill the speech of those critical of the administration and its unlawful policies. Through the policies of DHS and federal agencies, he has instated a de facto policy of collecting DNA swabs of anyone detained for any amount of time for an internal database, regardless of the basis or legality of the detention, or whether any charges are ultimately filed against the detained individual, chilling the First Amendment protected protest. Coerced social media companies into censoring app developers who created ICE tracking tools to help protesters organize responses to federal agents in their communities. Violating and chilling freedoms of the press. Limited White House and Department of Defense press access of certain journalists and media companies, including the Associated Press, for reporting news that he disfavors, while providing special access to the partisan media companies that openly support Trump and his policies. This includes Trump's banishment of a Wall Street Journal reporter from an Air Force One for a Scotland trip in July 2025 because Wall Street Journal published a story about Trump's involvement in Jeffrey Epstein's birthday book in 2023. Repeatedly attacked the press on his own social media accounts for their viewpoints or reporting. For example, Trump threatened CNN with prosecution for its critical coverage of strikes on Iran and for reporting on an app that provides warnings for immigration raids. Suggested the Federal Communications Commission should revoke ABC and NBC's news broadcasting licenses, accusing them of posing a threat to our democracy for covering the news in a manner that he disfavored. In the wake of these threats, media, from CBS to be more specialized outlets, have changed their editorial policies in response to criticism from the Trump administration, and in one case, fired a journalist to appease him and change those policies when it benefits Trump. Through the FCC, issued guidance requiring late night and daytime hosts to give equal time when booking political candidates as guests, then began a meritless investigation of The View. Demanded that Netflix fire board member Susan Rice for suggesting that corporations will and should be held accountable for violating the law. Brought meritless suits against major media companies for covering the news in a manner he disfavors. For example, he brought a baseless defamation suit against the Wall Street Journal for its 2025 coverage of Trump's relationship with Epstein. He also brought baseless suits against the New York Times, Disney, and Paramount, and obtained a settlement with Paramount while the government controlled the Paramount's pending merger deal with Skydance, which the FCC approved shortly after the case was settled. As part of the merger, the former leader of a right-wing policy think tank will be appointed as sorry, you guys.
You're good.
At CBS to review complaints about its news coverage despite having no experience in overseeing news. Since the merger, CBS, via the new editor-in-chief, Barry Weiss, refused to air a piece exposing human rights abuses in the El Salvador prison where Trump has deported hundreds of people, apparently on the ground that the Trump administration refused to comment. Trump threatens to sue CBS if it didn't release an unedited version of his interview. CBS complied. In a subsequent interview, CBS edited an interview with Trump to make his answers appear lucid and remove 7 nonsensical rants. CBS blocked an interview with Texas Democrat James Tallarico after threats by Brendan Carr, the head of the FCC, to use the equal time rule against late-night comedy hosts. Dismantled the Voice of America and other news media sources funded by the U.S. Agency for Global Media. targeted individual journalists and media organizations that credibly report on the Trump administration's unlawful actions by posting their names and on the whitehouse.gov webpage as media offender of the week. Defended Saudi Arabia's murder of the journalist Jamal Khashoggi and chided journalists for embarrassing Saudi Arabia's de facto leader, Mohammed bin Salman, by asking relevant questions about Khashoggi's killing. Discussed firing particular journalists at CNN as part of blessing Paramount Skydance's attempted takeover of Warner Brothers Discovery, who owns CNN, and launched an investigation of Netflix's attempt over the Warner Brothers Discovery, which Trump has publicly indicated is motivated by his desire to create a compliant media ecosystem. Netflix withdrew its bid, and the Trump administration has effectively waived any antitrust concerns for Paramount's bid for Warner Brothers. Dave Ellison has confirmed that he will subject CNN to the treatment CBS received, claiming it is a model of editorial independence. Through Attorney General Pam Bondi ordered the arrest of journalist Don Lemon for covering a protest. After a federal judge in Minnesota refused to issue a warrant for Lemon's arrest, correctly noting that there was no probable cause for First Amendment protected activity, the Justice Department obtained an indictment and falsely claimed that Lemon's reporting on a protest was an attack. Personally, and through the FCC Commissioner Brendan Carr and the Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, suggested that broadcasters will lose their licenses unless they provide positive reporting on the ongoing war in Iran, and threatened to jail a journalist if they do not hand over an anonymous source related to the war in Iran. Hegseth has publicly gloated that coverage will change to favor Trump's war policies in CNN once the Ellisons control it. Through FTC, ordered or authorized a spurious investigation into NewsGuard, which issues credibility ratings regarding news outlets in retaliation for its low ratings for Trump-favored media outlets. Ground number 9, unconstitutionally usurping Congress's powers. Trump has repeatedly usurped or attempted to usurp the authority and powers granted to Congress by the Constitution. As a few examples from a longer catalog of abuses, Trump and his officials created a position of authority in and over the federal agencies and installed Elon Musk in that position in violation of the advice and consent clause of the U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 2, Clause 2. Defied both Congress and the judiciary by blocking the distribution of trillions of dollars in funds that have been appropriated by Congress under Congress's exclusive constitutional authority under the taxing clause and the appropriations clause of the U.S. Constitution. Defied Congress by spending money appropriated for research to pay active duty military members during a shutdown, rather than advocating for the straightforward legal solution of passing a limited resolution to pay the troops. Defied Congress by refusing to continue funding SNAP benefits with the emergency contingency funds specifically available for that purpose, after spending that money for several weeks, and falsely blaming Democrats for not providing funding. Multiple courts have ruled against the Trump administration's failure to release the SNAP funds. Defied Congress by selectively refusing to fund SNAP benefits in states with Democratic majorities. Usurped Congress's appropriations power by convincing Japan to invest $550 billion in vague, unspecified projects, which will be distributed via corporations created, controlled, and directed by the president with no input from the legislative branch. Accepted a donation of $130 million from billionaire Timothy Mellon, whose identity Trump attempted to keep anonymous, and who's previously made significant contributions to the Trump and campaign to pay troops during the 2025 shutdown without obtaining congressional approval and in violation of the Anti-Deficiency Act. Destroyed the East Wing of the White House and is in the process of illegally constructing a ballroom. And quotations around ballroom for sure. Attempted to rename the Kennedy Center the Trump Kennedy Center. Unilaterally created without authorization a board of peace, primarily made up of authoritarian leaders, funded by the payments by those authoritarians, and directed in perpetuity by Trump himself, not the United States president. Exercised unilateral control over oil assets that were illegally seized from Venezuela, routing them through Qatar, and planned to route them into an account controlled by the Treasury Department. On May 18th, 2026, Trump announced that he had settled his baseless lawsuit against the IRS for $1.8 billion to be dispersed to Trump allies who have been fairly and properly investigated and prosecuted by prior administrations for a wide range of crimes, including those committed by the January 6th insurrectionists. The lawsuit, which the IRS and the DOJ, under Trump's control, refused to properly defend, and subsequent agreement to funnel taxpayer money to Trump represents a blatant and unconstitutional attempt to usurp Congress's spending power. Furthermore, Section 4 of the 14th Amendment declares that neither of the United States nor the state shall assume or pay any debt or obligation incurred in aid of an insurrection or rebellion against the United States. But all such debts, obligations, and claims shall be held illegal and void. Insofar the slush fund rewards insurrection or pays the damages insurrectionists suffered as a result of their actions, those payments are illegal. I'm going to pause there, even though we still have so much to cover. I would really love for you guys to pop over to impeachtrumpagain.org and take action. We have a really easy to follow system there that you can take those steps to hold this man accountable and the people around him. So please do so. And now I'm going to pass it on to Jax.
Thanks so much, Kendra. So we're going to just continue on here. Dismantling several departments and agencies that are congressionally mandated, including the Department of Education, the Social Security Administration, the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, Voice of America, United States Agency for International Development, the Institute of Museum and Library Services, the Minority Business Development Agency, the Federal Mediation and Conciliation Service, U.S. Interagency Council on Homelessness, Community Development Financial Institution Fund, and the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars and Smithsonian Institution. And ground 10, defying court orders, threatening judges, and unconstitutionally usurping judicial authority. Trump and his administration have repeatedly refused to comply with court orders, including by refusing to release $2 billion in congressional appropriated foreign aid payments after being ordered to do so twice by a U.S. District Court and by the U.S. Supreme Court. In defying this and other court orders, Trump has violated the U.S. Constitution and trampled on the powers afforded to the judiciary branch by the founders in order to check abuses of power from other branches of the government. Trump and his administration have refused to release $2 billion in foreign aid in defiance of multiple court orders, refused to adhere to court orders that prohibit the Office of Management and Budget from implementing a freeze on all federal assistance, unlawfully deporting 261 Venezuelan immigrants to El Salvador for immediate imprisonment, in open defiance of court order, and demanded the judge impeachment solely because Trump disagreed with the judge's ruling. Deported a doctor and a medical school professor with a valid work visa in defiance of a court order or in disregard of court proceedings and knowledge of an imminent court order. Refused to adhere a court order requiring U.S. Office of Personnel Management Charles Ezell to testify in person on March 13th, 2025 in a lawsuit challenging Ezell and OPM's termination of thousands of employees. Refused to follow a court order to fulfill its statutory mandate that the Voice of America serve as a, quote, serve as a consistently reliable and authoritarian source of news instead of moving forward with staff reductions. Refused to offer legal and practical assistance with families illegally separated by the first Trump administration, consistent with a binding settlement agreement. attempted to evade ruling that the administration could not federalize Oregon's National Guard by deploying California and Texas National Guard to Oregon. Unequivocally ceased compliance with a settlement agreement limiting its ability to make warrantless arrests in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Missouri, Kentucky, and Kansas on June 11, 2025. Continued to condition federal aid on grants overseen by the Department of Homeland Security on cooperation with the immigration authorities in direct defiance of a court order calling those conditions as illegal. Repeatedly lied to a federal district court by maintaining in court that the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was still functioning while internally shutting it down. Defied a court order to disperse SNAP funds, refused to adhere to an order that it allow immigration detainee access to lawyers, lied to a federal district court by maintaining the decision to charge Kilmar Abrego Garcia with human trafficking was solely made by the local acting U.S. attorney when senior officials, in fact, pressured him to bring those charges. Through the Department of Homeland Security, DHS taken the position that federal agents can enter homes with administrative warrants that are not reviewed by an Article III judge in bald defiance of the Fourth Amendment. Defied orders requiring bond hearings in immigration cases, systematically attempted to evade judicial oversight by moving, often in defiance of court orders, detainees, including citizens, to what the Trump administration perceives to be more favorable jurisdictions. Lied to a federal district court by initially maintaining that Musk's unlawful DOJ team was focused on fraud, waste, and abuse when several members of the team had shared data with third parties seeking to overturn the election results in certain states. Violated a settlement agreement protecting victims of the first Trump administration's zero tolerance family separation policy, with the court finding that the violations, quote, involved lies, deception, and coercion. Systematically defied court orders requiring bond hearings for individuals held in immigration detention, defied a preliminary injunction barring DHS and FEMA from terminating the Shelter and Services Program, defied an order to return displays at the president's house in Philadelphia referencing slavery. Trump also poses a serious risk to the safety of judges and their ability to impartially uphold our laws and our rights. He has subjected judges who rule against him to abusive tirades, calling them, quote, crazed, rogue, deranged, a troublemaker, an agitator, corrupt, mean, and nasty, among other insults that undermine respect for judicial authority. He also demanded, without the basis, the impeachment of judges who rule against him and call for a, quote, crime bill he could use against rogue judges. The results have been predictable. In 2025, roughly a third of the federal judiciary has been flooded with threats, with data showing that these threats spike each time Trump uses abusive rhetoric against judges. And impeachable offense number 11, abusing investigatory and prosecutorial powers. Trump in politicizing and weaponizing the Department of Justice, the Department of Homeland Security, the Federal Bureau of Investigation, the regulatory powers of federal agencies to target individuals and entities he perceives as political enemies, and to shield himself and his allies from legitimate investigations and prosecutions. On behalf of the administration and Trump's chief of staff, Susie Willis has admitted that the score settling motivated these prosections. For example, manufactured and implemented a baseless indictment of former FBI Director James V. Comey when Trump had targeted for retribution because Comey refused to pledge a loyalty to Trump in 2017, and because the FBI initiated an investigation into Russia's interference in the 2016 election. To obtain this indictment, Trump fired a federal prosecutor who refused to prosecute Comey and New York Attorney General Letitia James without basis in nominating Lindsay Halligan, a member of his personal legal team with no prosecutorial experience, to the role. Comey's indictment is a bare bones document signed by Halligan and came despite the fact that prosecutors in Halligan's office, after a 2-month investigation, determined that the evidence was insufficient to support either criminal charges or a conviction. A federal and district court judge ruled that Halligan was illegally appointed and dismissed the case against Comey. Manufactured and implemented a second baseless indictment of James Comey for taking a picture of seashells. This second indictment has led to another wave of departures, further hollowing out the Department of Justice. Manufactured and implemented a baseless indictment of New York Attorney General James in retaliation for her principled litigation against the Trump Organization for fraud. The prosecution is led by Lindsay Halligan, a member of Trump's personal team with no prior prosecutorial experience, and a federal district court ruled that Halligan was illegally appointed and dismissed the case against James. Publicly ordered his attorney, Pam Bondi, to act now and act fast to prosecute political adversaries and others against whom he has long sought retribution, including former FBI Director James B. Comey, New York Attorney General Letitia James, and Senator Adam Schiff. Through top DOJ officials, ordered more than a dozen U.S. attorney offices to investigate a philanthropic group funded by George Soros, a wealthy Democratic donor whom Trump has previously demanded be imprisoned because he supports pro-democracy causes. The DOJ memo, which laid out potentially charges against Soros Group, indicated that Trump had ordered the DOJ to target specific people and organizations. Through Bill Pullett, the director of Federal Housing Finance Agency abused access to confidential access to mortgage documents to launch politically motivated mortgage fraud investigations into Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook and two prominent Democrats, California Senator Adam Schiff and New York Attorney General Letitia James, all of whom Trump views as political rivals and powerful voices of opposition. Through Attorney General Pam Bondi, launched a baseless and politically motivated grand jury probe into the Obama administration's handling of the investigation into Russia's involvement in the 2016 election. The launch of this investigation followed comments by then Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard, accusing Obama and his national security team of creating a false intelligence and community assessment. Trump himself has alleged that Obama rigged the 2016 elections and committed treason. In fact, Russia's interference in the 2016 election to support Trump's candidacy has been thoroughly and carefully documented by multiple government agencies that at the time were nonpartisan and credible, including the FBI, the DOJ, and an investigation led by Republican Special Counsel Robert Mueller, a Republican-led Senate committee, academics, and other reputable sources. The grand jury probe is an abuse of an important function of the government's prosecutorial powers, intended to prosecute Trump's political rival and elevate Trump's baseless denials of his foreign allies' interference in U.S. elections. And apologies. I'm passing it over to John, but before I do, I just want to encourage everyone to take action by going to impeachtrumpagain.org, sign the petition, but also check out our congressional impeachment tracker and see how your member of Congress voted back in June and December of 2025. I will now pass it back over to John.
Thank you, Jax. We are halfway through the reading of these high crimes Donald Trump has committed. I want to thank all of the partners here who have been doing this reading and all of you for joining us for this reading. I do want to address a comment that I've seen a couple times that people have brought up, that the votes are not there. Well, why are we even pushing for this when the votes are not there? We have three responses to this at Free Speech for People. Number one, we either have a constitution or we don't. We either have an impeachment clause or we don't. If we're not going to invoke the impeachment power at this critical moment for our nation, then we might as well say we're giving up on the Constitution. We refuse to give up on the United States Constitution. Number two, when we do not name these actions, as we're doing tonight, as high crimes, we normalize this conduct. These are not policy disputes. They are impeachable offenses. They are high crimes, and we must name them as such. And number three, members of Congress take the very same oath that Donald Trump took on January 20th, 2025, to protect and defend the Constitution. They have a duty, a sworn duty, to uphold that oath and to protect the Constitution at this critical hour by invoking the impeachment clause. And with that, I'll continue our reading. Subjected Jack Smith to a politically motivated investigation by the Office of Special Counsel because Smith, in his former role as special counsel, investigated Donald Trump for his unlawful possession of highly classified documents and for Trump's attempts to subvert the results of the 2020 election. Through acting Deputy Attorney General Emil Bove, ordered the criminal investigation and prosecution of city officials for refusing to cooperate with U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, or to otherwise aid the federal government's anti-immigration policies. Forced prosecutors to dismiss pending prosecutions related to the January 6, 2021 insurrection, subjected prosecutors to investigation for prosecuting these cases, and pardoned all insurrectionists who have thus far been convicted or pleaded guilty for crimes stemming from their involvement in the assault on the Capitol. He also fired, demoted, or pushed out nonpartisan career public servants of the Department of Justice and FBI, and is compiling data on FBI agents in retribution for their work to investigate and prosecute cases stemming from the January 6, 2021 insurrection and on the prosecution of Trump himself. The DOJ also placed prosecutors on leave for referring to Trump supporters who participated in the January 6, 2021 attack as a, quote, mob of rioters in a sentencing memo. Fired Maureen Comey, senior trial counsel and a career civil servant with the U.S. Department of Justice, who prosecuted Jeffrey Epstein and is the daughter of former FBI Director James Comey, without cause. Fired or pushed out nonpartisan career public servants for associating with individuals viewed by the Trump administration as being enemies of Trump or his senior officials, for refusing to pledge loyalty to agency leaders or without cause. Entered into a corrupt quid pro quo agreement with then New York City Mayor Eric Adams by arranging for the DOJ to dismiss a criminal case against Adams in return for Adams using city resources to enforce Trump's anti-immigration agenda, and placed on leave pending investigation DOJ officials who worked on the case. Fired hundreds of government officials tasked with government and corporate oversight, including high-ranking officials in the DOJ and the FBI. Created a weaponization group in the DOJ to investigate local and federal officers who, in carrying out their duties in a nonpartisan manner, investigated or prosecuted January 6 insurrectionists, Trump or his allies. The group is being led by Ed Martin and advised by Jared Wise, an ex-FBI agent and January 6 insurrectionist who was granted clemency by Trump for his role in the insurrection. Arrested government officials who oppose his anti-immigration policies, including California Senator Alex Padilla, Newark Mayor Ross Baraka, Representative LaMonica McIver, against whom the Department of Justice is pressing charges, and New York City Controller Brad Lander, and threatened to arrest other government officials, including California Governor Gavin Newsom. Ordered a sham investigation into Boston Children's Hospital to attempt to intimidate it into discontinuing gender-affirming care for minors. Fired 15 immigration judges without cause in July, adding to the more than 100 immigration judges who have been fired or voluntarily left under pressure from the Trump administration, prohibiting immigration judges from speaking directly with members of Congress, and assigning 600 military attorneys to serve as immigration judges who will push through Trump's mass deportation schemes and speed up his militarization of civilian agencies and functions. Shut down a bribery probe of border czar Tom Homan, who was caught accepting $50,000 in cash from an undercover FBI agent. Facilitated or otherwise blessed a plea deal for the former governor of Puerto Rico, Wanda Vázquez Garcet, and a billionaire banker, Julio Oreja Valentini, shortly before a scheduled bribery trial for paying the governor $300,000 in campaign contributions in exchange for her agreement to fire the territory's commissioner of financial investigations, who was investigating Herrera's bank at the time. Vázquez Garcet is a Trump supporter, and Herrera hired Trump's former personal lawyer, Christopher Kise, to represent him. Through Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, initiated a meritless investigation of Senator Mark Kelly for correctly stating that members of the military are obliged to not obey unlawful orders. The Pentagon is attempting to downgrade Senator Kelly's rank and pay. Through the Department of Justice, attempted unsuccessfully to indict 6 Democratic lawmakers for correctly stating that members of the military are obliged to not obey unlawful orders. Intervened through White House official Paul Agracia to return seized devices to Andrew Tate after he and his brother were intercepted returning to the United States after Trump was elected. The Tates face sex trafficking allegations in 3 countries and were previously represented by Agracia, who described himself as having a, quote, Nazi streak, end quote. Through then Attorney General Pam Bondi, dismissed charges against a surgeon who attempted distributing fake COVID-19 vaccine cards and destroying government-supplied vaccines. Through then Attorney General Pam Bondi, ordered the arrest of journalist Don Lemon for covering a protest after a federal judge in Minnesota refused to issue a warrant for Lemon's arrest, correctly noting there was no probable cause for First Amendment protected activity. The Justice Department obtained an indictment and falsely claimed that Lemon's reporting on a protest was an attack. Through U.S. Attorney Jason Quinones, began a baseless investigation into the false theory that President Obama and other federal officials orchestrated unrelated actions, ranging from the investigation of his unlawful contacts with Russia in the 2016 campaign to the investigation of crimes he committed during his first term in office. Trump ordered his former campaign lawyer, Joseph DeGeneva, to lead the inquiry after career prosecutor was removed from the case. Initiated a baseless investigation of Jerome Powell, the Federal Reserve Chair, to illegally influence monetary policy. Ordered or authorized an FBI raid in Fulton County, Georgia, relying on debunked claims about ballots in the 2020 election. As part of that investigation, the DOJ has demanded the identity of every worker who staffed the Fulton County 2020 election. Initiated baseless investigations of Minnesota officials who spoke out against his unlawful occupation of their state. Caused the SEC's enforcement chief to resign after blocking fraud and misconduct cases against political allies. Through Kash Patel, seeks to release a decade-old investigative file on Eric Swalwell, a Trump critic, former congressman, and former California gubernatorial candidate, which found that Swalwell had not committed any wrongdoing. Through Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth, intervened to prevent any investigation into an Army helicopter crew that flew over protesters before flying to Trump supporter Kid Rock's residence in what appears to be a staged event. Hegseth has since blocked any Inspector General investigation of the incident as well. To pursue his illegal immigration enforcement operations, dropped 23,000 criminal investigations, undermining public safety. Through the DOJ Civil Rights Division, which has no expertise in perjury, began an investigation into Cassidy Hutchinson for allegedly lying to Congress when she exposed Trump's insurrectionary behavior on January 6, 2021. ordered or authorized the DOJ to attempt to clear convictions of Proud Boys and Oath Keepers participants in the January 6th insurrection. Through Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, brought spurious, politically motivated criminal charges against the Southern Poverty Law Center arising out of its work monitoring and disrupting hate groups. Ordered or authorized a halt to an investigation into voter coercion in Puerto Rico, where criminal gangs allegedly coerced inmates to vote for a Republican ally of Trump. Ordered or authorized the DOJ to drop charges against Gautam Adani in exchange for investments in the United States, which does nothing to address the underlying bribery scheme that defrauded American investors and instead offers another opportunity to enrich Trump's political allies. Ordered or encouraged the DOJ to engage in prosecutorial misconduct after charging numerous peaceful protesters outside the ICE facility in Broadview, Illinois. The charges were all dismissed with prejudice, and individual DOJ attorneys may face sanctions. Ordered or authorized the baseless investigation of a nonprofit run by Democratic megadonor Reid Hoffman related to its financial support for E. Jean Carroll's legal team, who successfully sued Trump for sexually assaulting her and subsequently defaming her. I'll just do a side note here. There's a documentary out called Ask E. Jean. I encourage you to go see it. And this documentary came out right around the time that this whole new criminal investigation of E. Jean Carroll had begun. Corruptly misuse the FBI, DOJ, and other government agencies, and with the assistance of these agencies, placed improper pressure on elected officials to conceal the Epstein files from the public. Specifically, after years of purporting to support the release of the Epstein files held by the DOJ, Trump changed his public position after DOJ officials informed him that his name appears in the files. Ultimately, as of November 2025, DOJ maintained its refusal to release new documents from Epstein's case. Instead of ordering the DOJ to release documents within its own control, Trump ordered the DOJ to move the court to unseal Epstein's grand jury transcripts and exhibits, a highly irregular and baseless motion that would have undermined the sacred and longstanding secrecy of grand jury proceedings. The court denied the motion and called out the government's attempt at misdirection, noting that the government holds a substantial investigative trove concerning the Epstein case, and that it had, quote, so far withheld from the public, end quote, that the government's complete information trove would better inform the public about the Epstein case, and that the information contained in the Epstein grand jury transcript pales in comparison to the Epstein investigation information materials in the hands of the Department of Justice. While still refusing to release the Epstein files to the public and claiming them to be a hoax, Trump has directed that then Attorney General Bondi conduct politically driven investigations into Epstein's connection to people he identifies as political enemies and opponents, including Bill Clinton. In fulfillment of Trump's directive, Bondi assigned the Manhattan U.S. Attorney to lead the partisan probe. Trump engaged the most senior officials of the DOJ and FBI, including Attorney General Bondi, Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, and FBI Director Kash Patel, in his efforts to pressure Representative Lauren Boebert and Representative Nancy Mace to drop their support for congressional efforts to secure the release of the Epstein files. And before I hand it on to Alex, I will just add that, members of Congress, as I said, have a duty to step forward, invoke the impeachment clause. And we know that Congressman Al Green has done that twice. He's forced a floor vote. Congressman John Larson has introduced articles of impeachment. He must be pressed to force a floor vote. And any other member of Congress can invoke articles of impeachment, drawing on all these high crimes, new floor votes. There is no reason why there should not be daily votes on articles of impeachment in the House of Representatives. We must need to continue to build this case for impeachment. I'll now hand it to Alex. Thank you.
Thanks, Sean. I will continue because, no shocker, we have a lot more offenses to get through. So like you said, there is absolutely no reason that this is going on this long. We have a laundry list of impeachable offenses. So with that, I will continue. Through these and other acts, Trump has blocked federal agencies from carrying out investigations into his allies or preferred business concerns and has tasked the DOJ, the DHS, and other agencies with targeting people who oppose him and his policies. His termination and investigation of government employees who, have cleared the DOJ, the FBI, and other agencies of nonpartisan career public servants and have sent a strong signal that independence and impartiality will not be tolerated under the Trump regime. The Department of Justice and other government agencies are supposed to wield their considerable power to enforce the law in an independent, fair, and impartial manner. Trump, instead, is abusing these powers to attack and silence those in opposition and protect his allies and business interests. Under orders from Trump and his senior officials, Justice Department lawyers have repeatedly misled and lied to courts, violated court orders, and attacked judges. Without government credibility in the courtroom, the rule of law cannot survive. Further, the necessary skepticism with which the judiciary must now approach the DOJ and other Trump administration lawyers and officials means that every case involving the federal government requires significantly more judicial scrutiny and oversight, and as a result, justice is inevitably delayed. That delay is not incidental, but part of a strategic pattern used by the Trump administration to facilitate its continued unlawful actions in the face of and in defiance of court orders and oversight. Grounds 12, abusing his power to remove nonpartisan civil servants, punish perceived adversaries, and reshape federal agencies. Trump, through his close subordinates and agents, has abused the power of his office to seek retribution against perceived adversaries, including hundreds of nonpartisan career public servants within the DOJ and the FBI who were merely carrying out their duties. FBI agents, DOJ attorneys, and all federal employees are expected to carry out their duties impartially, regardless of the wealth, power, or status of the individuals they prosecute. And they are now being persecuted for diligently doing their jobs and using their constitutionally protected right to free speech under the First Amendment. Indeed, Deputy Attorney General Blanche has publicly boasted about the partisan nature of the firings. Approximately 30 employees at the Federal Emergency Management Agency, or FEMA, were suspended on August 26, 2025, as retaliation for writing a letter to Congress warning that the Trump administration was obstructing FEMA's mission to provide critical support during disasters in the service of uninformed cost cutting. The letter has 34 public signatories and 155 signatories who did not reveal their names for fear of retaliation. Suspended 144 employees from the Environmental Protection Agency in July 2025 as retaliation for signing a letter to the Environmental Protection Agency Administrator Lee Zeldin and Congress, accusing the Trump administration of politicizing the EPA. They allowed retaliation against Charles Borges, the whistleblower who filed a complaint alleging that individuals associated with the Department of Government Efficiency mishandled Americans' sensitive information. The retaliatory actions taken against Borges during Trump's authority led to Borges' involuntary resignation in August 29th of 2025. They subjected Jack Smith to a politically motivated investigation by the Office of Special Counsel because Smith, in his former role as special counsel, investigated Donald Trump for his unlawful possession of highly classified documents and for Trump's attempts to subvert the results of the 2020 election. The investigation occurred after Trump illegally fired the former head of the Office of the Special Counsel. They unlawfully fired federal law enforcement and attorneys involved in Special Counsel Jack Smith's investigation into Trump and the prosecution of Trump for violation of federal law. They unlawfully fired federal law enforcement and attorneys involved in investigating and prosecuting Trump's January 6th co-insurrectionists and put prosecutors on leave for describing the January 6th insurrection as a, quote, mob of rioters in a sentencing memo for unrelated crimes. Unlawfully investigated attorneys who were involved in the prosecution of Eric Adams, forcing them to eventually resign rather than falsely admit wrongdoing. They persecuted retired General Mark A. Milley, who served as chairman of the Joint Chief of Staff from 2019 to 2023 under both Trump and Biden, including by revoking his security clearance and security detail and ordering the Department of Defense to investigate him. They stripped former public officials of security details despite these individuals facing credible foreign or domestic threats, including former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, former director of the National Institute of Allergy and Infectious Diseases, Anthony Fauci, and other former officials who served in Trump's own administration. They forced the resignation of a career prosecutor who refused to indict Letitia James and had raised concerns about the prosecution of James Comey. They fired 2 prosecutors who opposed pursuing charges against Letitia James. They directed the Attorney General to revoke the security clearance and investigate Chris Krebs, former head of the Cybersecurity Infrastructure Security Agency, for denying that the 2020 election was rigged. Trump also fired, without cause, all 6 members of the Commission of Fine Arts, an independent federal body, amid public dissatisfaction with his destruction of the White House East Wing and proposed Ark Monument. He fired the acting U.S. attorney in Sacramento for emailing a Border Patrol official and reminding him that he had to abide by court orders and the United States Constitution. Ironic, because he's never abided by the United States Constitution. Through the director of the FBI, they fired a 16-year veteran of the FBI for displaying a pride flag at his desk. He disproportionately fired Black civil servants with no cause. Through the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, intervened to prevent the promotion of Black and women military officers. They recruited immigration judges with an ad featuring Judge Dredd, a satirical fictional character who serves a totalitarian fascist government as judge, jury, and executioner. Subsequent reports have found that immigration judges hired by the Trump administration are underqualified and partisan. He recruited federal agents using white supremacist messaging, including white supremacist songs embedded in advertisements, references to anti-Semitic literature, and messages that echo Nazi slogans. Indeed, the messaging was so racist that Colorado police issued a warning to police across the country that it might incite white supremacist violence and enticed violent white supremacists to join and infiltrate federal agencies. Keep that in mind when you think about who works for ICE. He also threatened to fire Jerome Powell, the chair of the Federal Reserve, if he does not resign. He also fired the entire National Science Board without any public explanation. The persecution of these officials undermines the independence of the DOJ, the FBI, and other federal agencies, and the agency's ability to protect the American people from abuse, corruption, and crimes committed by people with power or influence. Grounds 13. Engaging in unlawful extortion to co-opt law firms, the media, and private industry. Throughout his presidency, Trump has used unlawful threats and baseless investigations to pressure increasingly consolidated industries, which he has created in part to taking actions that the government could not lawfully compel, much of which is intended to personally benefit Trump and his allies or to silence critics of the Trump administration. This constitutes unlawful abuse of power and mirrors similar moves by authoritarian regimes elsewhere in the world, from Hungary to Russia, which have also created media regimes that toe the party line, sought to control higher education, and forced or pressured private industry to abet state surveillance. Trump has unlawfully intimidated media companies into censoring their own news coverage, creating Trump-friendly programming, and canceling programming that is critical of Trump, his administration, or his policies. Indeed, Trump has publicly posted a chart to social media of the ways in which he has reshaped the media to be more pliant. For example, Trump conditioned the approval of Paramount's merger with Skydance on a private settlement with him over his meritless suit against CBS, a Paramount-owned company. Since the merger, CBS installed a former leader of a right-wing policy think tank as an ombudsman to review complaints about its news coverage, change its editorial policies when Trump did not apply to them twice, produced fawning coverage of Trump officials, refused to air a piece exposing human rights abuses in El Salvador prison, where Trump has deported hundreds of people, apparently on the ground that the Trump administration refused to comment, and blocked an interview with Texas Democrat James Tallarico. Trump criticized Netflix during its attempted bid for Warner Brothers and interfered with the antitrust investigation of the merger to ensure that Paramount's bid for the company was successful and that Warner Brothers subsidiary CNN would fire the employees that Trump dislikes, as CBS did following its merger with Skydance. Netflix ultimately withdrew its bid, and the Trump administration has effectively waived any antitrust concerns for Paramount's bid for Warner Brothers, despite obvious overlaps between Paramount CBS and Warner Brothers CNN. David Ellison has confirmed he will subject CNN to the treatment CBS received, claiming it is a model of, quote, editorial independence. Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth has publicly gloated that coverage will become more pro-Trump at CNN once the Ellisons control it. The mere threat of reprisals led to the preemptive blocking of the Washington Post's endorsement of Kamala Harris in the 2024 race. Since then, Washington Post owner Jeff Bezos has intervened to ensure the newspaper is more Trump-friendly, which has included blocking a political cartoon, overhauling the opinion section to focus on, quote, personal liberties and free markets, and spent separately tens of millions of dollars to produce and advertise Melania Trump's Amazon documentary, while simultaneously laying off hundreds of Washington Post journalists. They stripped universities of millions of dollars in government grants because these universities refused to repress their own students' freedom of speech and assembly, and allegedly utilize admission practices disfavored by the Trump administration. One federal judge, rejecting Trump's punitive freeze on Harvard's research grants, found that the attack amounted to, quote, retaliation, unconstitutional conditions, and unconstitutional coercion. Nonetheless, several universities have capitulated to Trump's commands, surrendering control over their own academic freedom. He subjected or threatened to subject law firms to punishing sanctions via executive orders and invasive investigations in retaliation for these firms or firm employees for engaging in core First Amendment protected speech and association, specifically their hiring practices and representation of clients or issues disfavored by Trump, and use these executive orders, investigations, or the threat thereof to extort nearly $1 billion in free legal fees for his chosen legal causes from these firms and coerce them into changing their hiring and pro bono representation practices. Some firms capitulated, and many large law firms that did not explicitly capitulate have refused to represent challengers of Trump's policies. And with that, I will now pass to Jocelyn to continue the reading.
Both personally and via the Department of Defense attempted to intimidate Anthropic into allowing it to use its AI technology to institute domestic mass surveillance and create fully autonomous killing machines. The Trump administration has moved to bar the federal government from using Anthropic's tools and to designate Anthropic a supply chain risk, supposedly barring any company that does business with the US military to conduct any commercial activity with Anthropic. This threat is unlawful under the relevant statutes, Title 41 of the United States Code, sections 1321 through 1328, Title 10 under the United States Code, section 3252 for both procedural reasons and because the security threat is baseless. Days before, the administration threatened to invoke the Defense Production Act to force Anthropic to provide it with the tools it is now moving to ban as a security threat. Anthropic is suing the Pentagon, and although some companies have filed amicus briefs in support, OpenAI and Grok have made similar deals without serious safeguards. The harm of this extortion falls not only on industries, but on ordinary Americans. In choosing to capitulate to the whims of the Trump administration to protect or grow their already vast fortunes, Paramount executives left millions of viewers with fewer and less reliable independent news sources. Similarly, law firms that capitulate to Trump via direct deals or merely by bowing to Trump's pressure and declining to take on cases they may have otherwise taken on, have created a less equitable and less merit-based system of hiring at-large law firms and have left pro bono clients without legal services. Other AI companies will survive, but to do so, they will be forced to institute mass surveillance regimes and develop autonomous weapons. And because this unlawful coercion largely takes place outside of or parallel to legal action, the Trump administration can lose, as it has in every case challenging the attempted extortion of law firms, and still achieve its desired result. Again, it has successfully intimidated many large law firms into refusing to represent challengers to its policies while enforcing the deals of their illegal contracts with the individual law firms that capitulated. Given the consistent pattern of unlawful coercion, Congress must act to protect Americans from the weaponization of industry against them. Ground 14, engaging in corruption for his own and his close associates' personal enrichment. Throughout his presidency, Trump has engaged in highly corrupt practices, including explicit bribery schemes to obtain personal and political favors. These include using the power of his office to enrich himself, his family, and his close associates. Point 1, manipulated the stock market with tariff threats, advertised cryptocurrencies to facilitate bribery payments from foreign investors and others. For example, after a United Arab Emirates senior government official deposited $2 billion into World Liberty Financial, started by the Trump and Witkoff families. Steve Witkoff is an envoy to the Middle East, and another bought 49% of the company with a $500 million investment. The US signed an agreement allowing the UAE to access American-made AI computing chips despite concerns they would circumvent controls on selling those chips to China. Profited from branded products and services, solicited lucrative television and film opportunities for his family members, used political funds to enhance his personal properties and facilitate personal travel, hosted private meetings, dinners, and exclusive experiences related to his office for his personal financial benefit, ensured that his family business stood to the benefit from changes to prescription drug pricing, authorized the sale of F-35 fighter planes to Saudi Arabia despite national security concerns that China could access the technology if they were sold. Trump businesses have numerous investments and pending deals in Saudi Arabia that create a clear conflict of interest. Pressured the DOJ, which he currently controls, to pay him $230 million in damages for bringing lawful and justified cases against him, sued the IRS, over which he has unlawfully taken complete control, for $10 billion in damages, more than his entire net worth, because a federal contractor leaked his tax returns during his first term. The federal district court in which the case was filed expressed serious doubts about the merits of the case and whether the court has jurisdiction because of the clear conflict of interest. On May 18th, 2026, Trump and the Department of Justice, over which Trump has also unlawfully taken complete control, announced that even though Trump withdrew the case in the face of the district's court's doubts as to whether the case should go forward, to settle the case, the Department of Justice would place $1.8 billion into a slush fund to be dispersed to Trump's political and personal allies, including potentially Trump himself. The agreement also included an addendum that prohibits the IRS from inspecting or investigating any tax returns already filed by Trump, his family, his companies, or related companies, thereby protecting them from oversight, investigation, and prosecution for tax-related crimes. This agreement is not a settlement of any colorable claims, but an illegal and unconstitutional theft by Trump of taxpayer dollars and purported tax immunity. As the district court explained, because the dismissal of the case does not reference any settlement or include a stipulation of settlement, there is no settlement of record. Additionally, defendants, federal agencies represented by the Department of Justice, which has an independent obligation to uphold the public's strong interest in knowing about the conduct of its government and expenditure of its resources and the fair administration of justice, neither submitted any settlement documents nor filed any documents ensuring that settlement was appropriate where there was an outstanding question as to whether an actual case or controversy existed, end quote. He unilaterally created without authorization a board of peace primarily made up of authoritarian leaders funded by payments by those authoritarians and directed in perpetuity by Trump himself, not the United States president. Carried out an unlawful, unconstitutional, wide-scale military attack on Venezuela to obtain control of its vast oil resources, with plans to turn over control of the country's oil and its profits to the US oil industry, led by companies that have financially and politically backed Trump, allowed a drone maker owned in part by his sons to bid for Pentagon contracts, allowed his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to solicit billions of dollars for his private equity firm from Mideast foreign governments while simultaneously leading negotiations with those governments on behalf of the United States, facilitated a $1.25 million settlement for disgraced former General Michael Flynn's frivolous wrongful prosecution suit, Flynn served as a national security advisor to Trump for 22 days during his first administration and is a long-term Trump ally. Bought millions of dollars in NVIDIA stock ahead of its regulatory decisions his administration made that boosted its price. Handpicked a firm he had close relations with and offered them a no-bid contract to renovate the reflecting pool despite the firm's lack of relevant experience. Received real estate from the state of Florida worth up to $300 million for his presidential library, which he indicates he intends to monetize after his presidency. Secured a $620 million deal with the Pentagon for a company his son's venture capital firm had taken a stake in 3 months earlier. Soliciting personal gifts, donations, and other benefits in bribery or extortion schemes, including a $400 million luxury plane from Qatar, nearly $1 billion in promised law firm services toward his preferred pro bono causes, obtained by subjecting or threatening to subject these law firms to punishing sanctions, multi-million-dollar settlements for baseless lawsuits filed against media companies, including a settlement obtained from Paramount so that the FCC would approve a sought-after merger, donations to build a $300 million ballroom addition to the White House from individuals who stand to benefit from his policies, many of which are currently facing federal investigations, and some of which have been kept secret. Donations for $1 million to Freedom 20 in exchange for access to Trump. Supporting or facilitating his subordinates in abusing government resources for personal benefit. Allowed cabinet members to hold power despite unprecedented conflicts of interest. Failed to adopt any formal ethics guidelines for top political appointees and rolling back existing protections. Allowed Elon Musk, while Musk had powerful position within his administration, to enrich himself and his companies, including by promoting Tesla vehicle sales in front of the White House and allowing the State Department to purchase $400 million in armored Tesla Cybertrucks, those hideous things. Allowed his Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick's family to cash in on the pro-AI policies he is promoting in his official capacity. Through senior officials privately meeting with politically connected billionaires before it was publicly revealed that they would be given a regulatory permit, allowing them to profit by buying millions of shares. Allowing David Sachs, his artificial intelligence and crypto czar, to promote policies that directly benefit the companies in which he has significant investments. Allow DHS to fast track a $1 billion contract to a donor with a deal overseen by a former employee of the donor's pro-Trump nonprofit. Allow DHS to adopt partisan loyalty requirements for procurement, which then awarded a $250,000 contract to a consulting firm with ties to Corey Lewandowski, then a senior advisor to the Secretary of DHS. Trump has repeatedly undermined the rule of law to favor himself and his associates, including by granting pardons or dismissing criminal charges against political allies, donors, or business associates. The founders feared that an executive could abuse the significant power and authority of his office for corrupt ends. Their fears were well placed. Trump has created a multi-tiered system that favors people, businesses, and even foreign governments who are best positioned to enrich him and his allies at the expense of the United States' own security, wealth, well-being, and rule of law. Any one of these schemes warrants impeachment and removal. Together, they demonstrate clearly impeachable abuses of power that put our country at risk for Trump's personal benefit. Ground 15, co-opting and dismantling independent government oversight of businesses, government institutions, and law enforcement. Trump has dismantled anti-corruption and government oversight institutions, safeguards, and frameworks across multiple government agencies. The purpose and result has been to shield corporations and entire industries from regulations intended to protect consumers and the public, open unprecedented opportunities for corruption by government officials, and block oversight of federal and local law enforcement, even as US Customs and Immigration Enforcement, or ICE officers, and other law enforcement officers acting on orders given by Trump and his senior associates arrest and engage in brutality against immigrants, academics, protesters, and Trump political opponents. And I will now turn it over to Nicole.
Thank you, Jocelyn. So, as part of these efforts to dismantle government oversight, Trump is terminating government officials in order to undermine agency oversight capabilities. Trump has abused his power to fire officials from key government positions and curtail federal agencies' ability to carry out their missions. His acts will prevent independent government oversight of his own businesses and those of his benefactors, including billionaire Elon Musk, who with Trump encouragement and complicity gave $288 million in contributions to his own super PACs to support Trump's 2024 campaign, promoted a massive disinformation campaign on X, which Musk owns, and engaged in an unlawful $1 million lottery scheme to bribe voters to vote for Trump, specifically Trump. He fired Lisa Cook from the Board of Governors of the Federal Reserve on August 25, 2025, which the Supreme Court temporarily blocked. The court will hear oral argument in Cook's case in January 2026. Already heard. In justifying the firing, which is statutorily must be for cause, Trump alleged that Cook may have committed mortgage fraud. Though Cook has not been charged or convicted of any crime, and Trump has committed identical acts. The attempted firing undermines the independence of the U.S. central bank, potentially giving Trump a path to control interest rates, inject additional uncertainty and risk into global markets, and further manipulate the global financial system to advance his family, and his associates' personal financial interests. Ordered the unlawful termination of more than 17 duly appointed inspectors general of U.S. agencies, who serve as nonpartisan public servants charged with preventing government waste, fraud, and abuse. Many were terminated after or while their agencies carry out investigations into Musk-owned companies. Appointed Musk, whose business have 100 contracts worth $15.4 billion across 17 federal agencies, to lead the so-called Department of Government Efficiency, or as we all know it, DOGE. Though Congress did not create DOGE or confirm Musk to any official office, DOGE authorized or advised the termination of thousands of federal employees, frozen trillions of dollars in federal grant funds, limited agency activities, and unlawfully accessed private data held by federal agencies, including private taxpayer information. He fired the National Labor Relations Boards, or NLRB, General Counsel, and one Democratic NLRB board member, leaving the NLRB without quorum or authority to adjudicate cases. The NLRB was pursuing 24 investigations into Musk-owned companies and had filed a case against Musk SpaceX. He seized operations of the Office of Federal Contract Compliance Program, which enforces equal employment laws for federal contractors, and was investigating Musk-owned Tesla. Fired 2 Democratic Senate-confirmed commissioners of the Bipartisan Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, leaving it without quorum. The WEOC is charged with protecting employees from unlawful and discriminatory hiring process, it sued Tesla for racial harassment and retaliation in 2023. A lawsuit the Department of Justice, DOJ, has now moved to dismiss. Suspended all investigative work and all critical operations by the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, fired employees, and gave Dodge access to its sensitive data. CFPB is tasked with protecting consumers from unfair and deceptive practices from banks and other financial service providers. Had it not been shorter, it would have regulated Moss Control X, planned mobile payment services, and continued to supervise the auto lending industry, including Tesla. Laid off or bought out between 4 and 10% of the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration employees, including 3 of the 7 experts in an office that oversees the safety of autonomous vehicles. It had multiple active investigations into Tesla at the time of the layoff. Fired the director of the Office of Government Ethics without cause. Fired the ethics advisor of the Attorney General without cause. Terminated a member of the Merit System Protection Board, leaving the board without quorum to conduct its business. Fired the head of the Office of Professional Responsibility, which investigates allegations of professional misconduct by DOJ attorneys without cause. Preventing the investigation and prosecution of corruption and corporate malfeasance at home and abroad. Ordered the Department of Justice to stop investigating violations of the Foreign Corrupt Practices Act, which prohibits U.S. corporations and individuals for bribing foreign government officials to obtain a business advantage. The stop order will allow business controlled by Trump, his family, and his allies to bribe foreign government without oversight or consequence. Close down the Department of Justice National Cryptocurrency Enforcement Team. Narrow enforcement of the Foreign Agents Registration Act, and disbanded the Department of Justice Task Force Kleptocapture, which was focused on seizing the assets of Russian oligarchs. Disbanded the FBI's Foreign Influence Task Force, which was created for identifying and combating foreign interference in U.S. elections and government institutions. Reassign or force FBI agents assigned to public corruption cases to resign. Scale back anti-money laundering rules to allow shell companies to hide the identities of their beneficial owners. Thwarted or dropped investigations into corporate malfeasance, including more than 40 investigations and oversight matters involving Musk, a Clean Air Act case against a Louisiana rubber factory, consumer protection actions against financial service companies, and lawsuits against cryptocurrency firms and their executives. Allow the DHS to systematically obstruct its Inspector General from providing oversight of its activities. Preventing the oversight of law enforcement, including ICE officials and other law enforcement officials who are carrying out his campaign against immigrants, protesters, academics, and political opponents. Dismantled 3 watchdogs agencies tasked with oversight of the Department of Homeland Security. Deleted a federal policy misconduct database. Dismissed oversight agreements with policy departments that were put into place because the departments committed civil rights violations. In April 2026, the DOJ baselessly and self-servingly alleged that the Presidential Records Act is unconstitutional, heightening the possibility that Trump has or will destroy or refuse to hand over official records at the end of his presidency. To obscure the truth about his presidency, undermine future efforts to accurately record his actions, and shield Trump, his administration, and his conspirators from accountability for their many abuses of power and the harm they have committed against the American people. 16. Imposing unlawful tariffs. Trump imposed harmful and unlawful tariffs on countries across the world, which unconstitutionally usurps tax powers explicitly reserved to Congress pursuant to Article 1, Section 8 of the U.S. Constitution, abuses his limited emergency powers under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, and violates multiple trade agreements. The tariffs constitute an unlawful tax and have undermined the United States economy, led to retaliatory tariffs from trade partners, had devastating effects on stock and bond markets, and crippled the economic security of Americans and the American businesses. The United States faces significant risk of recession even as other Trump policies undermine consumers and labor protections. Furthermore, Trump has continued to levy tariffs in arbitrary and illegal ways. Moreover, Trump is using and remains positioned to use illegal tariffs to corruptly benefit his own and his allies' financial interests and entrench his political power. First, Trump already has exempted certain industries and electronics from his broad tariffs, and remains positioned to abuse his power to grant exceptions or set punitive tariffs that benefit his and his allies' financial interests. Second, Trump's abrupt imposition of tariffs and equally abrupt pause on these tariffs may have been part of a market manipulation or insider trader schemes that benefited government officials and external allies who improperly used their advanced knowledge of Trump's orders for improper financial gain. 17. Receiving foreign and domestic emoluments. The domestic and foreign emoluments clauses of the Constitution prohibit the president from profiting from the United States, individual states, or foreign governments. U.S. Constitution, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 8, and Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7. The founders understood these clauses to provide a critical safeguard against corruption. However, Trump has refused to relinquish his ownership stake in his companies, including real estate holdings and golf resorts, the Trump Media and Technology Group, which owns True Social and World Liberty Financial. He already has or is assured to receive substantial payment and benefit from foreign governments, including Saudi Arabia, from the United States, and from several states. One of these benefits includes a 13-year-old luxury jet worth between 300 and 400 million, which has been gifted to him by the Qatari royal family. The jet, which has been owned and used by Qatari royal family, poses significant risk to the U.S. national security. Trump also sued the IRS, which is under his control, for $10 billion in damages, more than his entire net worth, because a federal contractor leaked his tax returns during his first term. On May 18, 2026, Trump announced that he had settled his lawsuit against the IRS for $1.8 billion, which is going to be disbursed to Trump's political allies, including January 6 insurrectionists. When asked point blank if he will leak to collect money from this fund, Trump dodged the question, claiming a committee, which he will create and control by and through his attorney general, and his ability to fire committee members, will decide that question. The establishment of this illegal slush fund under Trump's control, whether or not any is distributed directly to him, would qualify as a straightforward violation of the Domestic Emoluments Clause, U.S. Constitution, Article 2, Section 1, Clause 7, which provides that the president shall, at stated times, receive for his services a compensation which shall neither be increased nor diminished during the period for which he shall have been elected, and he shall not receive within that period any other emolument from the United States or any of them. The emoluments are unconstitutional and warrant impeachment of their face. But the danger emoluments-driven corruption pose to the safety, security, and well-being of the country and to the American public become apparent when taking into account the benefits that the Trump administration has visited upon Trump's benefactors. For example, Trump and his family has significant business ties with Saudi Arabia, which has obtained significant economic and military advantages under the Trump administration. Trump has designated Saudi Arabia as a major ally and authorized the sale of F-35 fighter planes to Saudi Arabia, despite national security concerns that China could access the technology if they were sold. And with this, I will pass it to Nia again. Yeah, and again, like we were saying before, I encourage all of you guys to go to our womensmarch.com website and sign our petition and join this movement that we're creating to impeach President Donald J. Trump.
Thank you. And with that, we will move on to the next offense. Number 18, unconstitutionally usurping local and state authority. Trump has attempted to unconstitutionally commandeer local and state authority to carry out his mass deportation plans by threatening state and local officials with criminal prosecution if they decline to be co-opted by federal immigration authorities. In a blatant disregard to the power reserved to the states under the 10th Amendment, Trump, via his then acting Deputy Attorney General, issued a memorandum asserting the authority to require state and local actors to comply with the executive branch's anti-immigration enforcement commands and the authority to prosecute state and local officials who do not do the federal government's bidding. The threat of even a baseless, unlawful prosecution may chill state and local officials and undermine their ability to determine how best to service their communities. Similarly, Trump has disseminated conspiracy theories about local officials, increasing the likelihood they will be the targets of political violence. Trump also is abusing the power of the U.S. military to punish Democratic-led cities and states, bypass local and state governments, oppress protesters, and support ICE's assault on immigrant communities. He deployed the National Guard troops in Los Angeles and Washington, D.C., armed the troops deployed in Washington, D.C., and fled at both cities with masked, armed federal agents. Although troops in Chicago have been enjoined from engaging in police activities, federal agents have assaulted the city in a military-style operation. Trump has carried out similar partisan military occupations of other cities and states whose elected officials oppose him and his policies, including Charlotte, Portland, Minneapolis, and Maine. During these occupations, federal agents have repeatedly used unlawful force against United States residents. Number 19, abusing the emergency power. The president's power to declare an emergency affords Trump access to powers and authority not normally afforded to the president. He has abused this power by falsely declaring national emergencies in order to bypass the rule of law, further his own agenda, and confer privileges on favored business sectors. He has declared a national emergency to justify deployment of troops at the U.S. border. In this declaration, Trump targets undocumented immigrants, dangerously and falsely claims efforts by vulnerable people to seek sanctuary in our country as invasion, tantamount to an attack on America's sovereignty. Immigration is neither an invasion nor an attack, and there is no basis for either a national emergency or troop deployment within our borders. Improperly declared a national energy emergency to protect and benefit fossil fuel companies and to block the renewable energy sector. Unlawfully invoked the Alien Enemies Act of 1798 to deport Venezuelans from the United States to El Salvador for immediate imprisonment. Unlawfully invoked the International Emergency Economic Powers Act to illegally and unilaterally impose tariffs on countries from around the world, a power solely afforded to Congress. Unlawfully invoked the District of Columbia Home Rule Act of 1973 to take control of Washington, D.C.'s police force and deploy the National Guard. Number 20, abusing the pardon power. Trump has abused the pardon power, undermined due process of law, and cost the American people more than $100 million in restitution that his pardon allies will no longer have to pay back to victims and U.S. taxpayers. Furthermore, many of the people pardoned have gone on to commit additional crimes, of course, undermining public safety. Trump pardoned and/or commuted more than 1,500 January 6 co-insurrectionists, commuted the sentences of 14 additional co-insurrectionists, and ordered the Department of Justice to drop cases against all remaining January 6 defendants. He has also absolved even those 400 insurrectionists who were charged with committing violent crimes against law enforcement. After inciting the insurrection, Trump has now blocked our country's efforts to hold his fellow insurrectionists accountable, and in doing so, further protects himself from investigation and repercussions of his own role in the insurrection. his former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Republicans who acted as fake electors for Trump, and dozens of other Trump allies who may have faced criminal charges for attempting to overturn Trump's 2020 election loss. Ed Martin, the DOJ's point person on pardons, linked his announcement of these pardons to a social media post that read, "No MAGA left behind." 23 anti-abortion protesters, signaling that he will undermine any and all lawful efforts to hold anti-choice protesters accountable for violent assaults on doctors, medical professionals, patients, and medical clinics that provide reproductive health care, and undermine states' rights to protect reproductive health care, the medical professionals who provide it, and the individuals who need it. Individuals who provided Trump with financial and other incentives to obtain a pardon, including Paul Walsack, an executive who pleaded guilty to tax crimes and was pardoned only after his mother contributed at least $1 million to a super PAC supporting Trump. Wealthy Republican politicians who have been found guilty of fraud, tax evasion, and other corruption crimes. Political supporters who have pleaded guilty or been convicted of serious felonies after fair and impartial trials. A leader of a nationwide crime syndicate who was serving multiple life sentences related to drug trafficking and violent crimes, business allies who pleaded guilty to corruption schemes involving cryptocurrency. Changpeng Zhao, the former CEO of Binance, a cryptocurrency exchange, who pleaded guilty to enabling money laundering, allowing money to flow to terrorists, cyber criminals, and child abusers on its platform. This occurred after Binance helped facilitate the rise of World Liberty Financial, the Trump family's cryptocurrency company, including by building the technology behind the currency and encouraging an Emirati state investor to conduct a $2 billion investment in Binance with a World Liberty Financial cryptocurrency. There's credible reporting this support was given with the expectation that Zhao would be pardoned in return. Jay Lewis, a British billionaire who pleaded guilty to participating in an insider trader scheme in 2024, fined $5 million and given 3 years probation. His pardon will enable him to travel to the United States despite his conviction. Serial con artist and disgraced former House of Representative member George Santos, potentially denying $370,000 of restitution to the victims of his fraud. Trump has claimed that Santos was treated unfairly. The 2020 alternative electors who conspired with Trump to overturn the results of the 2020 elections. Former President of Honduras, Juan Orlando Hernandez, who had been convicted of receiving millions of dollars in bribes and partnering with cocaine traffickers. Convicted fraudster, Adriana Cambreros, who had a previous conviction commuted by Trump in 2021. Trump has also attempted to pardon Tina Peters, who was convicted under Colorado law for tampering with voting machines after the 2020 election. That action is void, but it is an impeachable attempt to interfere with the Colorado criminal justice system and free Trump's co-conspirators who aided in him unlawfully attempting to overturn the 2020 election. Finally, credible reporting has revealed that Trump has repeatedly promised blanket pardons for virtually everyone in his administration. This corrupt promise incentivizes his subordinates to break laws with no fear of federal accountability. It is precisely this type of gross abuse of power that the impeachment power was intended to counteract. Number 21, abusing his power to undermine public health and safety. Trump, directly and through his senior officials in his administration, is dismantling America's public health infrastructure and decimating our public health protections, expertise, research, data, and safeguards. He is endangering the health and safety of American residents, putting millions of lives in danger, and sabotaging the place that the United States once held as a leader in scientific and medical advancements. Life and liberty are fundamental American values, prioritized in the Declaration of Independence and secured by the 5th and 14th Amendments of the United States Constitution. Congress, under the power allotted to it by the Commerce Clause, has passed countless laws to ensure the common defense against injury and disease, and for decades, federally funded institutions have propelled medical advancements and disseminated vital public health information. Trump, DOJ, and the Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, have decimated these institutions and undermined their mission and credibility to the detriment of America's public health. By allowing and encouraging arbitrary and unreasonable actions to fire professionals, cut funding, change scientifically approved health guidelines, and spread misinformation, Trump has failed to faithfully execute his responsibilities as president and uphold the Constitution and duly passed laws of this nation. Trump knowingly gave his Secretary of the Department of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy, full power to go wild, and that's a quote, he said, go wild, and jeopardizing public health data, hiding vital public health information from the public, dismantling the agency's systems, firing critically important employees, and undermining the agency's mission. Trump's authorization and facilitation of unlawful actions to decimate the U.S. public health system include, but are not limited to, the following. Political and indiscriminate firings of federal health officials. On August 27, 2025, the White House terminated Dr. Susan Monedes, the director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, since her confirmation by the U.S. Senate in late July of 2025, because she clashed with Kennedy and his staff members over inaccurate and unscientific changes they wanted to make to guidance on vaccines. Following her unjustified firing, 4 high-ranking CDC officials resigned in protest. On June 9th, 2025, Kennedy announced that he was removing all 17 members of the CDC's Advisory Committee for Immunization Practices, ACIP, which makes recommendations on the safety, efficacy, and clinical needs of vaccines. The politically motivated removals allowed the Trump administration to circumvent the terms of the sitting ACIP members and obtain appointments he otherwise wouldn't have been able to make until 2028. By firing the current experts and stacking ACIP with vaccine skeptics who are loyal to Kennedy and Trump, instead of to the science or the public well-being, the Trump administration has deprived the public of authoritative, data-driven guidance on vaccines and disease prevention. Since taking office, Trump's HHS has attempted to cut an estimated 20,000 jobs at the agency through layoffs, early retirements, and buyouts. Nearly 10,000 of those are layoffs. This affected workers in the National Institutes of Health, NIH, Food and Drug Administration, who lost 3,500 employees, 20% of their workforce, and the CDC, who lost about 2,400 employees, which is also 20% of their workforce. 19 states and DC have sued the Trump administration over these massive layoffs, arguing that layoffs have impacted states' ability to protect public health by cutting off access to data, making it harder to grant access, and shuttering essential disease testing labs. And with that, before I pass it on, just a quick reminder, one thing that would really help is if you all continue to spread the word on social media, please call and tag your Congress members or whoever available. And I will pass it to Kendra.
Thank you. The federal government lost experts who coordinated travel for overseas drug facility inspectors, food safety professionals, drug approval experts, communication staff members, public records officials, and employees who oversaw contracts related to medical research. Some workers who were arbitrarily fired had to be rehired after HHS officials realized there were gaps in our ability to perform our duties. Many remaining officials at HHS are being paid but are not allowed to actually do their job and protect public health. RFK Jr. has fired 2 members of the U.S. Preventative Services Task Force, which determines when insurance must provide free preventative care without any coherent rationale, dismantling valuable programs at home and abroad. Trump issued a series of executive orders prohibiting diversity, equity, and inclusion policies throughout the federal government, including at the NIH, which received billions of dollars from Congress to fund medical research at universities, hospitals, and other institutions. This has drastically curtailed funding for health equity research aimed at narrowing the health gaps between racial and socioeconomic groups. NIH initially terminated at least 616 projects focused on health disparities. In other instances, lead investigators lost their grant awards because of affiliations with universities that Trump has accused of anti-Semitism. Loss of such funding will likely impact efforts to improve poor health in minority communities, low income and rural areas, and among Americans with disabilities. It also significantly hinders research into and slows medical advancement related to widespread health conditions such as cancer, diabetes, heart disease, and dementia. Under the Trump administration, key food safety programs have also been rolled back, putting more Americans at risk for contracting foodborne illnesses. For example, in March of 2025, the U.S. Department of Agriculture eliminated 2 committees that advise it on food safety. In April of 2025, the USDA withdrew a proposed rule that would help prevent food poisoning from poultry contaminated with salmonella, requiring companies to keep levels of salmonella bacteria under a certain threshold and test for common illness causing strains. Salmonella causes more than 1.3 million infections annually. By June 2025, nearly 1 in 5 positions were vacant at the FDA's Human Food Inspections Division. With the layoffs of health communication specialists and added requirements to get approval for public announcements from senior officials at HHS, many agencies housed with the HHS have lost their ability to urgently communicate important information directly to the public. In the summer of 2025, the CDC stopped tracking outbreaks of 6 of the 8 foodborne illnesses it had tracked for years as part of the FoodNet systems. On March 25th, 2025, HHS announced without warning that it could pull back $11.4 billion in congressionally appropriated COVID-era funding to state and local public health departments and other health organizations. Although much of the funding was used for COVID-specific activities, it was also authorized for other public health needs, such as wastewater surveillance, vaccinations, infection control activities, and community health workers. State and local health partners have also had to struggle for information grants and other support, as many of the federal employees and divisions they coordinated with have been laid off or restructured. Trump's sudden dismantling of the U.S. Agency for International Development, USAID, and ending thousands of global health grants has upended global cooperation in public health. For example, the U.S. provided roughly 32% of global health funding, creating an estimated loss of $9 to $10 billion this year and $30 to $40 billion over the next 3 to 5 years. Though the immediate impact of such loss will be felt abroad, the breakdown of global public health infrastructure will ultimately impact Americans at home as well. U.S. funding has allowed for surveillance, monitoring, research, and awareness of diseases developing in remote corners of the world, including Ebola, mpox, measles, and the bird flu. Losing collective global surveillance mechanisms allow pathogens to circulate unnoticed, making it more likely the disease is imported to the U.S. and that microbes will have time to evolve into more contagious and deadlier forms. Reporting indicates that this is already occurring. Experts assert that there have already been hundreds of thousands of deaths attributed to the aid cuts. The 2026 outbreak of Ebola has been exacerbated by the dismantling of USAID and the canceling of key scientific research. The Department of Veteran Affairs has functionally banned abortion in the Veteran Affairs facilities. HHS cut millions of dollars to the American Academy of Pediatrics in retaliation for their continuing adherence to evidence-based medicine, including vaccination recommendations and gender-affirming care. Without public announcement, the CDC has ceased collecting vast amounts of vaccination data, hampering the ability to track and respond to outbreaks. After meeting with donors, Trump directed the DHHS to rescind rules that required increased staffing levels at nursing homes. The EPA will no longer consider the human beings killed by air pollution when setting regulations, only the cost to industry. Spreading disinformation and promoting harmful policies. During the measles outbreak in Texas, Secretary Kennedy suggested that good nutrition, vitamin A, steroids, and cod liver oil can be used to prevent and treat measles, refused to recommend that parents vaccinate their children, and refused to share that with the public that the long-standing and well-supported scientific consensus that the safest and best way to prevent measles is to increase the vaccination rate. Later, Secretary Kennedy blamed immigrants, tapping into a racist legacy of attempts to dehumanize people of color by blaming them for public health crises. In May of 2025, the Trump administration released a report on the crisis of chronic disease in children that contained citations to studies that did not exist. The report also suggested, against scientific consensus, that routine childhood vaccinations may be harmful. In September of 2025, Trump held a press conference announcing that he would seek to label acetaminophen, Tylenol, as being linked to autism when taken during pregnancy to allow a form of vitamin B to be used as a treatment for autism. Neither change is supported by scientific consensus. Trump also, again, promoted the lie that links vaccines with autism and falsely claimed communities without vaccinations or access to acetaminophen did not have autism. Trump ordered a sham investigation into the Boston Children's Hospital to attempt to intimidate it into discontinuing gender-affirming care for minors. The CDC used its website to promote the debunked myth of a link between vaccines and autism and deleted a warning regarding dangerous and unscientific autism therapies. The CDC removed 7 of the 18 recommended childhood vaccines, including the COVID vaccine, with no rationale. It has since delayed the publication of a study showing the efficacy of the COVID vaccine, allegedly on the basis of faulty methodology, even though the methodology is commonly used to demonstrate vaccine efficacy and is accepted and well regarded by experts in the field. The CDC removed studies from its website showing that cell phones are not dangerous. Abusing his power in order to deprive the American public of accurate political, historic, scientific, and medical information. Trump has abused the power of office in order to suppress the public's access to accurate information and to proliferate disinformation that benefits him, his allies, and his interests. He is censoring and distorting information that is shared with the public and undermining federal institutions tasked with collecting and disseminating essential data and information data that in turn is used to make critical policy decisions that impact our public safety, health, education, economy, and foreign policies. Trump has defunded and criticized these institutions, fired federal officials that produce results he doesn't like, and hired officials who are loyal to him and not their agency's missions. A well-functioning democracy requires that citizens have access to accurate information. Disinformation deprives policymakers of the ability and responsibility to make policy choices that benefit the public, deprives voters of the ability to make informed decisions, and fosters distrust of the government and the data it produces. Before I pass off, I just want to remind everyone, please share this website and go to impeach Trump again and send to somebody. It's not too late to do the right thing. So with that, I'm going to send it to Jax.
Thanks so much, Kendra. I'm going to just continue on here. Just want to confirm we're on page 68. Yes? Okay. So removing important public health information from the public eye. In response to Trump's numerous directives in vilifying equal protection for transgender and gender nonconforming individuals, diversity and equity inclusion, and foreign aid, federal agencies began scrubbing healthcare data from their websites. Many national health surveys, indices, and dashboards went offline on January 31st, 2025. Since then, some pages and data have returned under court order, while others have been altered. Former Centers for Disease Control and Prevention Director Dr. Tom Frieden has stated that the CDC website can no longer be trusted. Injecting uncertainty in the reliability of this data directly harms the health of Americans and could impair medical treatment, hinder disease tracking and surveillance, and worsen health policy and diminish public trust in healthcare, crippling the ability of researchers to access IRS data. Due to significant workforce reductions, including a 29% reduction in its Research, Applied Analytics, and Statistics Office that provides statistical analysis, program evaluations, and research on topics affecting tax administration, The IRS has placed on its hold Joint Statistical Research Program, which allows leading researchers to work with tax data under strict privacy protocols to answer important economic policy questions. IRS management relies on this information when making strategic decisions around tax policy and enforcement. Defying the public access to current climate and environmental information, and blocked funding for critically important research in the field. Blocked public access to current and future versions of the National Climate Assessment, an initiative mandated by a 1990 Act of Congress that historically has provided reliable, comprehensive information about climate change and its effect on the United States. He dismissed 400 volunteer authors working on the current assessment, and on June 30th, 2025, the government website that hosts the most recent edition of the report went dark. Destroyed and removed environmental data across a number of government websites. This information, like the National Climate Assessment, is used by teachers, city planners, farmers, judges, economists, scientists, and the general public to really educate on climate change and its effects. Dismantled a 35-year-old effort to track global climate change by removing federal employees at the U.S. Global Change Research Program and canceling a government contract with ICF International. Slow-walked critical climate-related contracts, including contracts to help local communities prepare for extreme weather events, upkeep polar satellites, conduct post-hurricane flood assessment, and conduct drought forecasts. Disseminated the National Science Foundation funding for climate research at universities, cut staff and science research budgets at the Environmental Protection Agency, Center for Disease Control, Department of the Interior, Department of Agriculture, Department of Energy, National Aeronautics and Space Administration, and the National Oceanic Atmospheric Administration. In a telltale sign of authoritarianism, rewriting our country's history in schools, museums, and public spaces to serve a radical racist ideology and his political and personal preferences. On January 29, 2025, Trump issued an executive order intended to force schools and other public education spaces to present a revisionist history of the United States. In the order, Trump claimed that the K-12 schools are imprinting anti-American imprinting American subversive, harmful, and false ideologies in our nation's schools, threatened to cut federal funding to schools that teach critical, important facts about U.S. history, including facts about the oppression of people based on race and gender, and promoted his version of the, quote, patriotic education online in public schools in a bid to deprive children of accurate information about U.S. history where such information conflicts with his ideology. In March 2025, he issued an executive order to demand the culling of accurate information from the Smithsonian and other institutions, and has implemented a review of 8 Smithsonian institutions in order to ensure that their public-facing content are compliant with his ideological-driven directives. Though he purported to restore truth, quote, truth and sanity to American history, unquote, he is doing the opposite. He falsely accused the Smithsonian of promoting narratives that portray American and Western values as inherently harmful and oppressive because it displayed accurate information about the United States. He demanded that the Smithsonian and other institutions celebrate American exceptionalism, remove divisive and partisan narratives, and restore confidence in our shared cultural institutions, end quote, at the cost of accurate information. The Trump administration has demanded that divisive, quote, divisive, and, quote, ideological-driven language should be replaced with, quote, unifying messaging. The intent of this demand is clear. He has complained that the Smithsonian focuses too much on how bad slavery was, quote, sought to minimize government references to Black heroes like the Tuskegee Airmen and Harriet Tubman. In August 2025, the White House doubled down, listing or misleading describing a variety of factual correct exhibits as grounds for his determination that the Smithsonian is politically biased. In January 2026, the references of impeachment from his first term were removed from his portraits at the Smithsonian. In response to Trump's demand that DEI content be stripped from government websites, the Pentagon, Arlington Cemetery, and other institutions deleted references to Black, Native American, Latino, and female historical figures, while leaving up references to white male historical figures. Some of these references have been restored, but the government continues to minimize the ways in which people of color have shaped American history. Due to Trump's pressure, the National Museum of American History first removed references to Trump's 2 impeachments from his first term, while leaving up references to other historical presidential impeachments, and then added back the references with watered-down language about his 2 impeachments. The Trump administration has partnered with PragerU, a conservative partisan organization whose founder has acknowledged that his content is intended to, quote, indoctrinate kids with right-wing ideology. It is displaying PragerU in AI-generated videos that include the false and biased depictions of historical figures in the Founders Museum exhibit. The Trump administration ended federal support to public libraries and archives throughout the country, substantially undermining the public's access to educational materials that have not been curated by the government or partisan sources. The Trump administration censored books and other educational materials at public schools, on military bases, banning books on a variety of subjects, including U.S. history, non-white historical leaders, and science. The DOJ removed from its website a study that presented data showing that far-right extremists have killed more Americans than any other type of domestic terror group. As a child of MAGA white supremacists, I can agree that that is unfortunately very true in this country. Getting into now impeachment, the impeachable offense number 23, unlawfully aggregating and disseminating private data in violation of individual privacy and liberty laws. On March 20th, 2025, Trump issued an executive order to eliminate information silos, quote, called for the, quote, consolidation of unclassified agency records. In the months since, it has become clear that the purpose and intent of this order is to enable Trump and his allies to aggregate and exploit sensitive data about every American and every person living in the United States to further consolidate their power in their authoritarian usurpation of the United States government at the expense of our democracy and the rights and liberties of the people. Through the so-called Department of, quote, Department of Government Efficiency, which was run for several months by Elon Musk and a private contractor, Palantir Technologies, Trump is consolidating and disseminating sensitive, non-anonymized personal data about people who live in the United States, both citizen and not a citizen. The information has been culled from essential data across federal agencies, including the Department of Treasury, Social Security Administration, Department of Health and Human Services, and Department of Education, all of which hold detailed personal information, including medical, financial, and identifying data about individuals in the United States, all of whom have responsible expectations that this data will be kept confidential and used only for the purposes for which individuals will share their sensitive information. In August 2025, a whistleblower complaint from Social Security Administration Chief Data Officer Charles Borges revealed that in June 2025, DOJ created an unmonitored copy of all SSA's data on the American public to a vulnerable cloud server, not subject to oversight, putting the personal information of all 300 million Americans at risk of being leaked or hacked. In January 2026, the Trump administration admitted in court filings that several DOJ employees have shared Social Security Administration data with unauthorized third parties seeking to overturn election results in certain states. In April 2026, Trump ordered DHS to create a state citizen list using Social Security records and information from other federal databases. The DOJ has since admitted in court that the list would not be reliable and that no responsible state should use it to update its voting rolls. This plan to aggregate and disseminate personal information violates the Privacy Act of 1974, meant to safeguard personal information handled by the federal government. The responsible expectation of privacy, long recognized in the Fourth Amendment and the Due Process Clause of the 14th Amendment, which prohibits the deprivation of life, liberty, or property without due process of the law. The collapse of information silos puts people's personal information and identities at risk from access, use, and abuse by the government and agencies and private companies. The result will leave people vulnerable to surveillance and tracking without knowledge or judicial oversight. It will chill freedom of expression, prevent people from accessing information, important government services, allowing for the weaponization of data against political opponents, and cost people their autonomy. It also expresses individuals and the information systems to exponentially more damaging cyber attacks from foreign nations, terrorists, and cyber criminals. Now going into impeachment number 24. Depriving citizens of their birthright citizenship. Birthright citizenship has been enshrined in our Constitution for more than 150 years in the 14th Amendment, unequivocally and without exception, conferring citizenship on all persons born or naturalized in the United States. In lawless of defiance of the Constitution, Trump issued an executive order purporting to strip U.S.-born citizens of their citizenship because of their parents' immigration status. The court has been stayed for now, but it does not absolve Trump of his abuse of power on Congress, of his responsibility to hold Trump accountable for his dangerous and unlawful attack on U.S. citizens' basic rights to their own nationality. On July 25th, 2025, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services issued a detailed implementation plan to revoke citizenship from the American-born children of immigrants who lack permanent legal status and many lawful residents, including visa holders, dreamers, and asylum seekers. The plan will require the government to carry out intrusive review of parents' immigration papers to gauge each newborn's legal status, but contains no instruction on what resources a child might have if their citizenship is improperly taken from them, either due to error or maliciousness. If implemented, children will be stripped of their citizenship, subject to deportation to foreign countries, and potentially condemned to a statelessness. Getting into impeachment number 25, blocking efforts to secure elections. The United States is facing unprecedented threats of foreign and domestic interference in U.S. elections from entities that have the resources, tools, and capacities to hack our election systems, and the emails of high-level officials to spread disinformation and propaganda via social media platforms. National intelligence agencies have concluded that Russia carried out a multifaceted assault on the 2016 election to benefit Trump, and Russia, Iran, and China continue to attempt to interfere in U.S. elections via hacking and widespread propaganda and misinformation campaigns. And pro-Trump operatives and election officials associated with efforts to overturn the 2020 election have unlawfully breached voting systems and obtained copies of voting machine software, which they have widely shared and which can be exploited to undermine our election systems. Despite these known risks, Trump has directly or through his close allies ordered the apolitical cybersecurity infrastructure security agency to halt all election security and fired 130 CISA cybersecurity professionals, disbanded the FBI's task force assigned to investigate unlawful foreign influence in U.S. elections, ordered the DOJ to investigate the state criminal conviction of Tina Peters, a Trump ally who gave a man unlawful access to voting equipment in May 2021, enabling the equipment's password and copies of its hard drive to be posted online. Launched a multi-pronged effort with partisan allies to harass local election officials, obtain access to voting equipment in a manner that undermines their reliability and security, and gather data on voters ahead of the 2026 election. Preemptively pardoned his former personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, his former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, Republicans who served as fake electors for Trump, and dozens of Trump allies who have faced criminal charges for attempting to overturn Trump's 2020 election loss. Ed Martin, the DOJ's point person on pardons, linked his announcement of his pardons to a social media post that read, "No MAGA left behind," unquote. Getting into impeachment, impeachable offense number 26. Engaging in unlawful corrupt practices during the 2024 presidential campaign. Trump must be investigated for unlawful, unconstitutional, or corrupt practices that occurred during the 2024 re-election campaign. Trump violated campaign finance laws by offering tax and regulatory favors to oil and gas executives if they provide $1 billion in contributions, concealing legal service payments by his campaign and related super PACs, unlawfully coordinating with super PACs that supported his candidacy, including those financed by billionaires he later appointed to key administrative positions, and facilitating and accepting unlawful campaign contributions from Musk, particularly via Musk's $1 million lottery scheme that paid out prizes only to individuals who publicly support Trump. Used racist, xenophobic rhetoric that endangered the safety of marginalized communities, threatened physical violence against political opponents, a U.S. military commander, journalists, and protesters. Spread dangerous information about U.S. hurricane disaster response that undermined the safety of natural disaster survivors and emergency response service providers. And that concludes. I will pass it over to John.
Thank you, Jax. I want to thank everyone for joining us this evening for this first public reading of all of Trump's impeachable offenses, but it must not be the last. We hope you're inspired tonight to stand up with us and fight for Donald Trump's impeachment and removal. Each one of these high crimes warrant his immediate impeachment and removal, and we must keep naming them publicly. If you go to impeachtrumpagain.org and you go to the printable materials tab at the top, you can get a number of things, including signs to take to rallies, but you can also get a how to do this public reading in your own community, to gather your friends, your neighbors, and to do it in your own community to help lift up the case for impeaching and removing Donald Trump. We urge you to do that. We urge you to help spread the word about this campaign, to go to Women's March and sign their petition, to go to impeachtrumpagain.org and sign this petition. We have over 1.1 million people across the country who have joined this campaign, and we need to keep building it. And we also, of course, urge you to contact your members of Congress, your representative, and to demand that they introduce articles of impeachment and that they force under House Rule 9 a vote on the floor of the House of Representatives. Any member of Congress can introduce articles of impeachment, and any member of Congress can, under Rule 9, force a floor vote. And as I said earlier, there is no reason why we should not be having daily votes on articles of impeachment against Donald Trump. He is a lawless tyrant in the White House, and he must be removed. And finally, I urge you to spread the word on social media about this. Help get the word out about this campaign. But I really want to thank my colleagues at Free Speech or People, Jax, Jocelyn, Nia, and our partners at Women's March, Nicole, Kendra, and Alex, for joining us for this reading. And as I said, it will not be the last. We must keep fighting. We will continue to track all of these high crimes that occur almost on a daily basis. We will continue to demand that Congress do its job to uphold the Constitution and to invoke the impeachment power. And we will continue to fight for the impeachment and removal of Donald Trump from public office. Thank you all so much for being with us tonight.